The stars blazed in the midnight sky above Ravenhurst as Isolde traced ancient patterns with her fingertips. From her perch atop Widow's Peak, the kingdom spread below like a dark tapestry sewn with golden threads of lamplight. The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and distant hearth fires, whispering secrets to those wise enough to listen. Isolde was always listening. Her weathered journal lay open beside her, filled with calculations and star charts meticulously drawn over months of observation. Tonight's celestial alignment was rare, occurring only once every 70 years, according to the ancient texts she had salvaged from forgotten library corners. The conjunction of the blood moon and the Seven Sisters constellation would reveal pathways normally hidden from mortal eyes. "Mother was right," she whispered to the darkness. "The heavens do speak to those who know their language." The memory of her mother's voice still lingered in the chambers of her heart, though 8 years had passed since illness had claimed her. Eleanor Blackwood had been unlike any other woman in Ravenhurst, a scholar in an era when women were expected to concern themselves only with hearth and family. She had taught Isolde to read the stars, to decipher ancient languages, to question what others accepted without thought. "Beauty doesn't matter," her mother would say, smoothing Isolde's plain brown hair as they huddled over manuscripts by candlelight. "It's what's inside that counts. The mind, the heart. Remember that, my sweet girl, when the world tries to tell you otherwise." Isolde had clung to those words through the long years of her mother's wasting illness, through her father's increasing distance as he buried himself in diplomatic missions rather than face his grief, through the whispers of servants who called her odd for preferring the company of books to that of other children. She had believed her mother's words with the fierce conviction of youth, until the day she stopped believing them at all. The blood moon finally reached its zenith, bathing the landscape in crimson light. Isolde closed her eyes, reciting the ancient celestial verse from the Codex of Eveningtide, a text so old and obscure that most scholars doubted its existence. But Isolde had found it, buried beneath moldering scrolls in her father's neglected library. "When crimson shadow falls upon the Sisters Seven, the veil between worlds grows thin as spiders weaving. Speak then of things unseen, of paths unwalked, of doors unopened." The wind stilled as if the night itself held its breath. For a moment, Isolde felt a strange resonance, as if something vast and ancient had acknowledged her presence. Then the moment passed, and she was alone again with the stars and the wind. She sighed, gathering her instruments into their leather case. Perhaps some ancient texts were mere fanciful poetry after all. She would return to her studies, to the tangible realities of astronomical movements and mathematical certainties. As she descended the narrow mountain path toward the forest that separated the peak from her father's estate, Isolde allowed herself a rare moment of self-reflection. At 25, she had long passed the age when most women of noble birth were married with children of their own. Not that she had been without suitors in her youth. Her father's position as Lord of the Northern Marches ensured that. But those suitors had seen only her father's influence, his lands, his gold. None had seen her. None except Ambrose. The thought of the old scholar brought a fleeting smile to her lips. Lord Ambrose Wyndham, royal astronomer to the ironwood throne, had been her mother's mentor and friend. He alone had recognized Isolde's gift for languages and mathematics when she was barely 12. Under his distant guidance through correspondence, she had flourished intellectually even as her social prospects withered. The forest enveloped her in familiar darkness. The path known so well, she could walk it blindfolded. Fallen leaves cushioned her steps, releasing the musty scent of decay with each footfall. Autumn was deepening toward winter, and soon the mountain would be impassable until spring. The trees thinned as she approached the northern edge of her father's estate, revealing the dark silhouette of Griffin Manor against the starlit sky. Lights still burned in several windows despite the late hour. Unusual. Her father was away on diplomatic business in the capital, and the servants rarely stayed awake past the evening meal. Then she remembered. Lord Griffin was returning tonight, and not alone. After 3 years of widowhood, he had remarried during his extended stay in the capital. Tonight, Isolde would meet her new stepmother and stepsister. The knowledge settled in her stomach like cold lead. Her father's letters had been sparse with details, mentioning only that Lady Evangeline Brunswick was a woman of considerable charm and beauty, and that her daughter Seraphina was a jewel among the young ladies of the court. He had instructed Isolde to make them welcome, to assist them in adjusting to life at Griffin Manor. Isolde steeled herself as she approached the servants' entrance, preferring to avoid the formal greeting that would undoubtedly await her in the main hall. She had no illusions about this new arrangement. Her father had been increasingly distant since her mother's death, uncomfortable with Isolde's resemblance to Eleanor, both in appearance and intellect. This new marriage was his attempt to recapture something he had lost: youth, beauty, simplicity. The kitchens were warm and fragrant with the scents of celebratory cooking: roasted meats, fresh bread, spiced wine. Isolde slipped past the bustling servants, noting their nervous energy. Lady Evangeline must have exacting standards to inspire such anxiety. She had nearly reached the back staircase that would lead to her chambers in the east wing when Cook spotted her. "Lady Isolde, there you are. Your father has been asking for you these past 2 hours." The plump woman's face was flushed with the heat of the ovens and the stress of the evening. "They've arrived, miss, and the Lord is none too pleased you weren't there to greet them proper." Isolde suppressed a sigh. "I lost track of time, Agnes. My observations—" "Stars and books won't matter to Lady Evangeline, if you'll pardon my boldness," Agnes interrupted, lowering her voice. "She's particular about what she calls the proprieties. You'd best change quickly and join them in the Great Hall. They've held dinner waiting for you." The Great Hall of Griffin Manor blazed with more candles than Isolde had seen lit since her mother's funeral. Crystal glittered, silver gleamed, and the ancient tapestries depicting the Griffin family's centuries of service to the ironwood throne had been cleaned of dust. The long oak table, normally bare except for Isolde's scattered books and papers, was laid with the finest linen and china. And at the head of the table sat her father, looking younger than she had seen him in years. His graying beard was neatly trimmed, his clothes fashionable rather than practical. Beside him sat a woman who could only be Lady Evangeline. Isolde paused in the doorway, taking the measure of her new stepmother. Evangeline Brunswick was perhaps 40, though she carried herself with the vitality of a much younger woman. Her golden hair was arranged in an elaborate style that emphasized the elegant curve of her neck. Her face was a perfect oval, features delicate and symmetrical, with only the faintest lines at the corners of her eyes betraying her age. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk that complemented her eyes and displayed her figure to advantage without crossing the boundaries of propriety. She was, in a word, magnificent, the kind of beauty that made other women feel instantly diminished in comparison. And then there was the daughter. Seraphina sat on her mother's right, a vision in silver and white. Where Evangeline was golden summer sunlight, Seraphina was moonlight on fresh snow. Her hair fell in platinum waves down her back, her eyes the pale blue of winter skies. She couldn't be more than 18, but she carried herself with the confidence of one who has never questioned her place in the world's order. What struck Isolde most, however, was not the girl's beauty, but the subtle aura of something other that clung to her, something not quite human. Then Seraphina turned fully toward the doorway, and Isolde understood. The girl's eyes had vertical pupils, like a cat's in bright light, a silver wolf, one of the rarest and most revered bloodlines among the shapeshifters. Lord Griffin finally noticed his daughter hovering in the doorway and rose to his feet, his expression a complex mixture of pleasure and disappointment. "Isolde, at last. Come, meet your new family." She forced her feet to move, approaching the table with measured steps. Her travel-stained clothes and wind-tangled hair made her acutely conscious of her appearance in a way she rarely was. She cursed herself for not taking the time to change. "Father," she inclined her head respectfully before turning to Lady Evangeline. "My lady, welcome to Griffin Manor. I apologize for not being present upon your arrival." Evangeline's smile was perfect, revealing teeth like small pearls. "No apology necessary, dear Isolde. Your father explained you were engaged in scholarly pursuits. I find such dedication admirable in one so young." The words were gracious, but something in the woman's tone suggested otherwise. There was a subtle emphasis on scholarly that transformed it from praise to peculiarity. Isolde had heard that tone before from court ladies who found her interests unseemly. "And this is my daughter Serafina," Evangeline continued, placing a manicured hand on the girl's shoulder. "I'm sure you two will become the closest of sisters in no time." Serafina's smile never reached her strange, beautiful eyes. "I've heard so much about you, Lady Isolde. Father Griffin speaks most highly of your intellectual accomplishments." Again, that subtle inflection that transformed praise into something less complimentary. Isolde inclined her head, keeping her expression neutral. "I look forward to knowing you better, Lady Serafina." Lord Griffin cleared his throat, gesturing to the empty chair at his left. "Sit, Isolde. The food grows cold, and we have much to discuss." The meal passed in a blur of forced pleasantries and subtle assessments. Evangeline dominated the conversation with tales of court life, names of nobles Isolde had never met, but was apparently expected to know, descriptions of fashions and scandals and political maneuverings. Lord Griffin hung on every word, transformed from the serious, reserved diplomat Isolde knew into an attentive, almost besotted admirer. Serafina spoke little but observed much, her strange eyes missing nothing. Occasionally she would interject with a perfectly timed comment or question that redirected the conversation or emphasized her mother's points. They worked together with the seamless coordination of long practice. Isolde pushed food around her plate, answering when addressed directly, but otherwise remaining silent. Her mind raced, cataloging impressions, analyzing the subtle currents of power flowing around the table. By the time the final course was cleared away, she had reached several conclusions. First, her father was thoroughly enchanted by his new wife, viewing her through a haze of infatuation that blinded him to any potential flaws. Second, Evangeline was ambitious, her seemingly frivolous conversation veiling sharp intelligence and political acumen. Third, and most concerning, beneath Evangeline's polished courtesy toward Isolde lay something very much like animosity. But why? They had only just met. What cause could the woman have to dislike her? "Isolde." Her father's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Lady Evangeline was just saying that she hopes to introduce Serafina at court during the winter solstice celebrations. The Alpha King himself will be in attendance." Evangeline's perfect smile widened. "Indeed, King Thorn has expressed particular interest in meeting Serafina. Her silver bloodline is of great interest to the throne, especially with the upcoming alliance negotiations with the Eastern Territories." Isolde understood the implication immediately. The Alpha King was unmarried, his throne secured, but his dynasty not yet established. A match with a silver wolf would bring powerful magic into the royal bloodline. Serafina was being positioned as a potential queen. "How fortunate," Isolde said carefully. "The silver bloodline is indeed rare. I don't believe I've encountered another silver wolf besides Lady Serafina." "We are few," Serafina agreed, her voice musical and cool. "My father's line carried the gift. Mother has ensured I understand the responsibilities that come with such heritage." "Serafina transforms with unparalleled grace," Evangeline said proudly. Even the court shapeshifters were impressed by her control and the purity of her form. Lord Griffin nodded. "I witnessed her transformation myself. Truly remarkable, like moonlight given physical form." Something in Isolde's chest tightened at the admiration in her father's voice, admiration he had never shown for her accomplishments. She had inherited her mother's mind, not the shape-shifting abilities that came through her father's bloodline, another way in which she failed to meet Griffin expectations. "Speaking of court," Lord Griffin continued, turning to Isolde, "I have news that concerns you directly." Isolde tensed. In her experience, news that concerned her directly was rarely positive. "Lord Ambrose Wyndham has requested permission to call upon you." The name hung in the air, unexpected and bewildering. Ambrose? The royal astronomer who had been her mother's mentor and her own distant guide through correspondence? They had met only twice in person, both times when she was a child. Why would he wish to call upon her now? "Lord Ambrose," Evangeline said, her perfect features arranged in an expression of polite surprise. "The royal astronomer? He must be, what, 65? 70? 65, Lord Griffin confirmed, and one of the most respected scholars in the kingdom. His interest in Isolde is a great honor. Interest? Isolde repeated, finding her voice at last. What sort of interest, Father? Lord Griffin cleared his throat, suddenly avoiding her gaze. Lord Ambrose has expressed admiration for your scholarly achievements, particularly your recent work translating the Codex of Eveningtide. He claims you've made breakthroughs with passages that have confounded scholars for centuries. Isolde blinked in surprise. She had sent Ambrose her translations months ago, but had received no response. She had assumed her work was unremarkable. He wishes to discuss a potential collaboration, her father continued, and other matters of a personal nature. The implication was clear. Lord Ambrose's interest was not purely academic. At 65, the royal astronomer was a widower of considerable standing and wealth, childless but still hale. A match between them would be unconventional but advantageous. Isolde sat very still, processing this unexpected development. Marriage had never featured in her plans for the future. She had assumed she would continue her scholarly pursuits, perhaps eventually securing a position as an archivist or translator in some noble household. The prospect of marriage to anyone, let alone a man 40 years her senior, had never crossed her mind. How unexpected, Evangeline remarked, something sharp flashing behind her smile. Though I suppose it makes a certain sense. A man of Lord Ambrose's intellectual achievements would naturally seek a wife of similar inclinations. When does Lord Ambrose intend to call? Isolde asked, ignoring the implied slight. 3 days hence, her father replied. He travels from the capital even now. The remainder of the evening passed in a haze for Isolde. She excused herself as soon as propriety allowed, retreating to her chambers in the east wing. Her rooms remained unchanged, her books and instruments exactly as she had left them, but somehow they seemed different now, like artifacts from a life that was swiftly coming to an end. Sleep eluded her that night. She paced her chamber, mind racing with questions and possibilities. Why had Ambrose chosen now to make this overture? What did he truly want from her? Was her father correct in assuming his intentions were matrimonial? And if so, how did she feel about such a proposition? Marriage to Ambrose would provide freedom of a sort, access to the royal libraries, resources for her research, respite from the increasing awkwardness of her position in her father's household. Ambrose was not an unpleasant man, dignified, intelligent, respectful of her work. There were far worse fates for a woman of her situation, yet the thought left her cold, not because of Ambrose's age, but because of what it represented. Another arrangement, another transaction, another situation where her value lay in what she could provide rather than who she was. Dawn found her at her desk, quill in hand, adding to her already extensive notes on the celestial conjunction she had observed. Work had always been her refuge, her solace, the one aspect of her life where she felt truly in control. Whatever changes loomed on her horizon, she would face them with the same methodical approach she applied to her studies. 3 days passed in a strange limbo. Isolde spent most of her time in her chambers, avoiding the main areas of the manor where Evangeline had already begun making changes. Seraphina she glimpsed occasionally in the gardens, a pale figure among the autumn flowers, sometimes in human form, sometimes as a magnificent silver wolf that shimmered in the sunlight. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, a messenger arrived bearing news that Lord Ambrose's party had been delayed by weather in the mountain passes. His arrival was now expected the following day. Isolde received this news with mixed feelings, relief at the postponement, apprehension at the continued uncertainty. That evening, as she was preparing for another solitary meal in her chambers, there was a soft knock at her door. When she opened it, she found Seraphina standing in the corridor, resplendent in a gown of pale blue silk that matched her eyes. "Lady Isolde," the girl said, her voice melodious even in simple address. "Mother requests your presence for dinner this evening. She has something special planned in anticipation of Lord Ambrose's arrival tomorrow." Isolde hesitated, suspicion warring with courtesy. "Please tell Lady Evangeline I'll join you shortly." Seraphina's smile was perfect, revealing teeth that seemed just slightly sharper than human norm. "Wonderful. Mother will be pleased." When Serafina had departed, Isolde changed into one of her better gowns, a deep blue velvet that had belonged to her mother. It was somewhat out of fashion, but it was the finest thing she owned, and something in Serafina's manner suggested tonight's dinner would be more formal than usual. The great hall was transformed when she entered. Candles blazed in silver candelabras, casting warm light over the table laid with the finest crystal and porcelain. Fresh flowers scented the air, despite the lateness of the season. And at the head of the table, where her father usually sat, stood a stranger. No, not a stranger. As the man turned toward her, Isolde recognized him immediately, though it had been years since their last meeting. "Lord Ambrose," she said, unable to hide her surprise. "We thought you delayed in the mountains." Ambrose Wyndham had aged well since she had last seen him. His hair and beard were completely silver now, but still thick and well kept. His face was lined, but the lines spoke of laughter and thought rather than bitterness. His eyes, a deep brown flecked with gold, were as sharp and intelligent as she remembered. He smiled, revealing even white teeth. "Lady Isolde, the years have been kind to you. You have your mother's eyes." His voice was exactly as she remembered, deep, cultured, with the slight rasp that came from years of lecturing in great halls. Before she could respond, Evangeline swept into the room, Serafina gliding behind her like a pale shadow. "Lord Ambrose, you've arrived early. What a delightful surprise." Evangeline's smile was dazzling as she extended her hand to the scholar. Ambrose bowed over it with perfect courtesy. "Lady Evangeline, forgive the unexpected arrival. The weather cleared sooner than anticipated, and I was eager to reach Griffin Manor." His eyes shifted to Serafina. "And this must be your daughter. Lady Serafina, I presume? Your reputation precedes you." Serafina curtsied gracefully. "You honor me, Lord Ambrose." "Where is father?" Isolde asked, noting his absence. Evangeline's smile never wavered. "Called away on urgent business, I'm afraid. A messenger arrived from the capital just after lunch, some diplomatic matter requiring immediate attention." The timing seemed suspiciously convenient, but Isolde kept her doubts to herself. "I see. Then I suppose it falls to me to welcome you properly to Griffin Manor, Lord Ambrose." "Nothing would please me more," the old scholar replied, his eyes warm as they met hers. "I've looked forward to this meeting for quite some time." Dinner was an elaborate affair, far more sophisticated than the usual fare at Griffin Manor. Isolde wondered if Evangeline had brought a chef from the capital, for the dishes were worthy of a royal table. Throughout the meal, conversation flowed easily between the four of them, with Ambrose demonstrating an unexpected gift for social grace that put even Evangeline's polished charm in the shade. He spoke knowledgeably on court politics, the latest artistic trends in the capital, even fashion, hardly the topics Isolde would have expected from the reclusive royal astronomer. Yet when the conversation turned to scholarly matters, his passion and expertise shone even brighter. He described his current research into ancient celestial records and their correlation with historical events, theories that aligned remarkably with Isolde's own recent work. "Your translations of the Codex were nothing short of revolutionary," he told her, eyes alight with genuine admiration. Passages that had confounded scholars for centuries, suddenly clear as day. "How did you decipher the lunar calendar references?" "That particular cipher has resisted all previous attempts." Isolde warmed under his interest, explaining her methodology in detail. The key was recognizing that the text was not using a lunar cycle of 28 days, but 29 and a half, which is astronomically more accurate. Once I adjusted my calculations accordingly, the patterns became clear. "Brilliant," Ambrose said softly. "Exactly the approach Eleanor would have taken." The mention of her mother's name sent a pang through Isolde's heart. "You knew my mother well?" Ambrose's expression softened with old grief. "She was my finest student, and my dearest friend. Did she never tell you?" Isolde shook her head slowly. "She mentioned you, of course, but not that you were so close." "There was much Eleanor kept private," Ambrose said, something unreadable passing across his features, "including the extent of her own scholarly achievements. The world knows me as the royal astronomer, but many of the discoveries attributed to me were actually your mother's work." Isolde stared at him, stunned. But why would she allow that? The world was not ready to acknowledge a woman's contributions to astronomical science, Ambrose said simply. Eleanor understood this. She cared more for the work than the credit. Evangeline cleared her throat delicately. "How fascinating. All this talk of astronomy reminds me, Seraphina, didn't you bring that special vintage from the capital, the one you thought Lord Ambrose might appreciate?" Seraphina rose with fluid grace. "Of course, Mother. I nearly forgot." She glided from this room, returning moments later with a crystal decanter containing a deep red liquid that caught the candlelight like liquid rubies. "From the royal vineyards," Evangeline explained, as Seraphina poured the wine into fresh glasses. "A rare vintage, said to enhance the drinker's appreciation of beauty and truth." Isolde accepted her glass with murmured thanks, though something about the sudden shift in conversation raised her suspicions. The wine's aroma was unusually complex, notes of blackberry and oak, but also unfamiliar herbs and spices. "A toast," Evangeline proposed, raising her glass. "To new beginnings, new alliances, and the pursuit of knowledge." Ambrose raised his glass in turn. "To Eleanor's legacy, living on through her daughter." The others drank, but Isolde hesitated, something tugging at her memory. There had been a passage in one of her mother's notebooks, something about wines infused with certain herbs from the Eastern Territories, herbs with properties beyond the merely intoxicating. Seeing her hesitation, Evangeline's perfect smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Is something wrong with the wine, dear Isolde?" "Not at all," Isolde replied smoothly, raising the glass to her lips, but not drinking. "I'm simply savoring the bouquet. It's quite extraordinary." Evangeline watched her with those emerald eyes that suddenly seemed too sharp, too calculating. "Indeed it is. A unique blend. I selected it especially for tonight's celebration." Celebration. The word hung in the air, pregnant with implication. Ambrose was watching the exchange with growing awareness, his earlier warmth giving way to caution. "What precisely are we celebrating, Lady Evangeline?" he asked, setting his half-empty glass aside. "Why, your impending betrothal, of course," Evangeline replied, as if it were obvious. "To Seraphina." The silence that followed was absolute. Isolde froze, glass still raised, while Ambrose's expression shifted from confusion to comprehension to cold anger. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding," he said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. "I came to Griffin Manor to court Lady Isolde, not Lady Seraphina." Evangeline's perfect features arranged themselves into an expression of surprise that didn't reach her eyes. "But that's impossible. Lord Griffin assured me you sought a match with Seraphina. The arrangements have already been discussed." "Then Lord Griffin has either misunderstood or deliberately misrepresented my intentions," Ambrose replied, steel entering his tone. "I have corresponded with Lady Isolde for years. I came here to offer her a position as my research partner, and if she is willing, my wife." He turned to Isolde, his expression softening. "I know this is sudden, and perhaps unwelcome. I would understand if you require time to consider, or if you wish to refuse outright. But I want you to know that my interest is genuine, based on deep respect for your intellect and character." Isolde's mind raced, trying to process this sudden turn of events. Ambrose had come for her, not Seraphina. Her father had lied, or been lied to, and Evangeline had attempted to redirect Ambrose's interest to her own daughter through deception. But why? Seraphina was young, beautiful, and of rare bloodline. Ambrose was brilliant and respected, but an old man with no shape-shifting abilities. It made no sense as a match, unless the goal was not to secure Ambrose for Seraphina, but to ensure he was not secured by Isolde. "I'm flattered by your interest, Lord Ambrose," Isolde said carefully, setting her untouched wine aside, "and I would be honored to discuss a research partnership." Evangeline's perfect mask slipped for an instant, revealing something ugly beneath. Then she recovered, her smile returning with brittle brightness. "How wonderful, a scholarly collaboration," though I fear there has indeed been a misunderstanding regarding the nature of your visit." "No misunderstanding," Ambrose replied, his eyes never leaving Evangeline's face. "Only deception." Serafina, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, suddenly spoke. "Mother, perhaps we should retire and allow Lord Ambrose and Lady Isolde some privacy to discuss these matters." "What a thoughtful suggestion," Evangeline agreed, though her tone suggested otherwise. She rose with fluid grace, Serafina following suit. "We'll leave you to your intellectual discussions." After they had departed, Ambrose released a long breath. "My apologies, Lady Isolde. I did not intend for my arrival to create such discord in your household." "The discord preceded you," Isolde replied, thinking of the subtle tensions that had threaded through every interaction with her new stepmother. "Though I confess I don't understand Lady Evangeline's motives. Serafina could make a far more advantageous match than—" She stopped, realizing how her words might sound. Ambrose's laugh held no offense. "Then an aging scholar with no shape-shifting blood? You're quite right. Which suggests Lady Evangeline's goal was not to secure me for her daughter, but to prevent me from securing you." "But why would she care?" Isolde wondered aloud. "We've only just met." "Perhaps," Ambrose suggested, "she feels threatened by you in some way. Or perhaps this is part of a larger strategy I do not yet perceive." He paused, studying her face. "I meant what I said, Isolde. My interest in you is genuine, based on years of correspondence and your mother's high opinion. But I have no wish to press unwelcome attentions upon you." Isolde considered her response carefully. "I am honored by your regard, Lord Ambrose, and I would welcome the opportunity to collaborate on research. As for the rest, I would ask for time to consider." Ambrose nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Of course, take all the time you need. My primary concern is your happiness and well-being." They spent the next hour discussing their shared scholarly interests, the conversation flowing easily between them. Ambrose described his current work at the Royal Observatory, the ancient texts he had recently acquired, the questions that still eluded his understanding despite decades of study. "There is a particular mystery I believe you could help me solve," he said, lowering his voice though they were alone. "It concerns a celestial phenomenon known as the Crimson Convergence, which occurs once every 70 years when the blood moon aligns with the Seven Sisters constellation." Isolde's breath caught. "That was last night." Ambrose's eyes widened. "You observed it? Did you perform the celestial verse from the Codex?" "I did," she confirmed, surprised by his knowledge of such an obscure ritual, "though nothing happened." "Nothing that you perceived," Ambrose corrected. "The effects of such convergences are subtle, often unfolding over days or weeks after the event. The ancient texts speak of doors unopened and paths unwalked, metaphors for possibilities that arise from such alignments." A chill ran down Isolde's spine as she recalled the strange moment when the night had seemed to hold its breath around her. Perhaps something had happened after all. Their discussion continued until the candles burned low, ranging from ancient astronomy to the political implications of recent celestial events. Only when the manor's clock struck midnight did Ambrose reluctantly rise to depart. "I've kept you far too late," he apologized. "We'll continue our discussions tomorrow if you're willing." Isolde walked him to the guest wing, where chambers had been prepared for his stay. At his door, he paused, taking her hand in his. "One word of caution, if I may," he said, voice low. "The wine Lady Evangeline served tonight, you were wise not to drink it. I recognized the aroma too late. It contained moonshade and heartsbane, herbs known to induce a powerful suggestibility in those with shapeshifter blood." Isolde's eyes widened. "She tried to drug you?" "And you," Ambrose corrected. "Though you showed no reaction to it, which is interesting in itself. The herbs affect only those with shapeshifter blood. Your father is a beta wolf, which means you should carry at least some shapeshifter traits, even if you cannot transform." Isolde had never considered this. Her inability to shapeshift had always been a source of quiet disappointment to her father, a failure to live up to the Griffin legacy. The possibility that she might carry other, less visible traits of her heritage had never occurred to her. "Be careful, Isolde," Ambrose warned, squeezing her hand gently. "Lady Evangeline is not what she seems. Watch your food and drink, and trust no one completely, not even me." With those unsettling words, he bid her good night and disappeared into his chambers, leaving Isolde alone in the corridor with her thoughts. She returned to her own rooms, mind racing with new questions and possibilities. She was still awake, reading by candlelight, when the soft knock came at her door sometime after 2 in the morning. Wary after Ambrose's warning, she approached cautiously. "Who is it?" "It's me," came Evangeline's voice, honey-sweet and somehow wrong in the dead of night. "I've brought you something to help you sleep, dear Isolde. You must be overwrought after such an eventful evening." Isolde stood very still, heart pounding. "Thank you, but I'm not in need of sleep aids." "Don't be stubborn, child." Evangeline's voice hardened slightly. "Open the door. We should talk, woman to woman, about what transpired tonight." Every instinct warned Isolde against opening that door. She recalled Ambrose's warning about the drugged wine, the subtle animosity she had sensed in Evangeline from their first meeting. "It's very late, Lady Evangeline. Perhaps we could speak tomorrow after we've both rested." A long silence followed, broken only by the sound of liquid being poured, presumably into a glass or cup, just outside her door. Then Evangeline spoke again, her voice now dripping with false concern. "I've left a little something for you, dear. Warm milk with honey, just the thing to soothe frayed nerves. Drink it while it's hot. We'll speak tomorrow." Soft footsteps retreated down the corridor. Isolde waited several minutes to ensure Evangeline was truly gone before cautiously opening her door. On the floor sat a silver tray bearing a single porcelain cup filled with what appeared to be milk, still steaming in the cool night air. Isolde stared at it, remembering her mother's voice from long ago. "Never accept food or drink from someone you do not trust completely." She had thought it an odd warning then, but now its wisdom seemed evident. She closed and locked her door, leaving the tray untouched in the corridor. Whatever game Evangeline was playing, Isolde wanted no part in it. She would speak with Ambrose in the morning, perhaps make arrangements to depart Griffin Manor entirely. Her father had made his choice clear by his absence tonight, his willingness to let Evangeline manage his affairs and manipulate his daughter's future. Isolde returned to her reading, though her concentration was broken. Hours passed as she pored over the same passages repeatedly, her mind wandering to the strange events of the evening. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her, and she fell asleep in her chair, book still open in her lap. She dreamed of stars falling like rain, of silver wolves howling beneath a blood-red moon, of a beautiful woman with emerald eyes who turned into a serpent when she smiled. And through it all, a voice whispered from the darkness, "Beauty doesn't matter. It's what's inside that counts." But when she woke with the dawn, sweating and disoriented, she could no longer believe those words. For in a world where beauty granted power and privilege, where a silver wolf like Seraphina could aspire to be queen, while Isolde was relegated to dusty tomes and forgotten knowledge, beauty mattered very much indeed. What Isolde didn't yet understand was just how much it would come to matter in the days ahead. For outside her chamber door, where the untouched cup of milk should have been, sat instead a small glass vial containing a single drop of blood-red liquid. Attached was a note in elegant handwriting. "Since you refused my kindness, let us see how you fare with my cruelty instead. Beauty doesn't matter? We shall put that theory to the test." 3 years had weathered the stonework of the abandoned hunter's cottage, but not Isolde's determination. Morning sunlight filtered through gaps in the thatched roof, illuminating the small space she had transformed into both sanctuary and prison. Herbs hung in bundles from the rafters, their pungent aromas mingling with the scent of smoke from the small fire. Books and scrolls, salvaged during her hasty flight from Griffin Manor, filled crude shelves constructed from fallen timber. A makeshift work table occupied the center of the single room, its surface covered with mortar and pestle, glass vials, and carefully labeled pouches. This was her life now, solitary, hidden, necessary. She caught her reflection in a copper bowl of water and quickly looked away. Even after 3 years, the sight of her transformed face still brought a twist of pain, red eyes gleaming like embers in the dim light, patches of coarse brown fur spreading across her cheeks and forehead, the grotesque elongation of her canines that made even simple speech an exercise in careful control. The memory of that morning still burned bright as yesterday. She had discovered the vial of blood-red liquid outside her door, read Evangeline's mocking note, and rushed to Lord Ambrose's chambers only to find them empty. The scholar inexplicably vanished in the night. When she'd confronted Evangeline, demanding answers, her stepmother had only smiled that perfect, poisonous smile. "Did you know," Evangeline had asked conversationally, "that I was once considered for the position of royal astronomer's assistant? Your mother and I were both candidates, Eleanor with her brilliant mind, and I with my other qualities." Her smile had turned bitter. "But Lord Ambrose chose your mother, of course. Intelligence over beauty, mind over form. And now history repeats itself. The old scholar chooses another Blackwood woman over a Brunswick. Some patterns simply beg to be broken, don't you think?" Before Isolde could respond, the transformation had begun. Pain unlike anything she'd ever known. Her bones shifting, skin burning, consciousness flickering as her body warred with itself, caught between human and wolf forms, but unable to complete either transformation. She remembered screaming, remembered Seraphina's horrified face in the doorway, remembered her father's shouts as he returned from his mysteriously timed absence. And she remembered Evangeline's words, spoken with chilling satisfaction as Isolde writhed on the floor. "Lycanthropic dysphoria, an ancient curse of the Brunswick line, reserved for those who would steal what rightfully belongs to us, neither human nor wolf, but monstrous in between. The curse will break when someone willingly weds you in this form, which means, my dear, that it will never break at all." Isolde had fled that same night, taking only what she could carry, vanishing into the northern forests before her father's men could begin their search. Whether they had searched at all, she never knew. No one from Griffin Manor had come looking for the monster that had once been Lord Griffin's daughter. The soft cry of a raven drew her attention to the open window. The black bird perched on the sill, head cocked as if in greeting. Isolde smiled despite herself. Ravens were clever creatures, and this one had been visiting regularly for months, accepting offerings of food and occasionally bringing small trinkets in exchange, a shiny button, a colored thread, once even a silver coin. "Hello, friend," she murmured, careful not to display her teeth. She placed a handful of dried berries on the windowsill. "A fair trade for news of the world beyond my forest?" The raven accepted her offering with dignified pecks, then surprised her by dropping a small scroll from its beak. The parchment was fine, sealed with blue wax impressed with a symbol she didn't recognize. Isolde stared at it, then at the bird, which seemed to meet her gaze with unusual intelligence. "A messenger, are you? Who sends you, I wonder?" The raven gave no answer, of course, but continued to watch as she broke the seal and unrolled the tiny scroll. The handwriting was elegant, written in midnight blue ink that seemed to shimmer in the morning light. "The 6 sisters fade while dancing in dreamlight. The alpha seeks one who can see beyond shadows. The forest whispers your name, Red Eyes." Isolde read the message 3 times, pulse quickening. 6 sisters, the 6 princesses of the Ironwood throne, the Alpha King's beloved sisters. There had been rumors even before her transformation about their mysterious illness, how they grew weaker by the day, though physicians could find no cause. And Red Eyes, the name the villagers had given her, not knowing her true identity. Someone knew who she was. Someone wanted her help. A trap, perhaps. But why go to such elaborate lengths to trap one cursed woman living alone in the forest? She was no threat to anyone, had made no enemies since her exile, except perhaps among the villagers who sometimes crossed themselves when they caught glimpses of her hooded figure at market. The raven cawed once, as if impatient, then took wing, circling the cottage before flying north toward the village of Thornhollow. Isolde watched it go, mind racing. After 3 years of hiding, of subsistence, of academic pursuits continued in isolation, The message represented something she had not allowed herself to contemplate: possibility. She spent the day in careful preparation. If someone sought her help with the Ironwood princesses, they would be desperate indeed to turn to the forest creature the villagers called Red Eyes. Desperation bred both opportunity and danger. She would need to be ready for either. By sunset, she had gathered her most precious possessions: her mother's notebooks, the translations of the codex, a few rare herbs that grew only in the deep forest, and the silver dagger she kept hidden beneath her pallet. These she packed carefully into a leather satchel, along with dried meat and fruit sufficient for several days' journey. The village of Thorn Hollow lay 3 miles east of her cottage, a prosperous farming community known for its exceptional honey and the sturdy woolens its weavers produced. Under cover of darkness, Isolde made her way toward its outskirts, hood pulled low, moving silently through forest paths she knew by heart. The late autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat, the sounds of conversation and laughter drifting from cottage windows. It was market eve, when villagers gathered at the common house to trade goods and gossip. Isolde skirted the main thoroughfare, keeping to shadows, watching and listening. She had nearly reached the central well when she noticed the unusual gathering. Dozens of villagers clustered together, their faces tight with anger and fear, voices rising in agitation. At the center of the crowd stood a familiar figure, Lady Eleanor Rowan, the wealthiest landowner in Thornhollow and mother to a frail daughter named Imogen. "I tell you it was her." Lady Rowan's voice cut through the crowd's murmur. "Who else would do such a thing? Red Eyes will be the death of us all if we don't act." Isolde's blood turned to ice. She pressed herself against the shadow of a granary, straining to hear the accusations being leveled against her. "We should have driven her from our forests months ago," Lady Rowan continued, her sharp features twisted with vindictive certainty. "Now look what's happened. Poor Widow Hendrick's flock, all of them slaughtered in the night, torn apart as if by some wild beast." Isolde frowned in confusion. She had done no such thing. She never took more from the forest or the village than what she absolutely needed, and certainly had no reason to slaughter a widow's flock. Wild wolves occasionally ventured near the village in harsh weather, but autumn had been mild, the hunting good in the deeper woods. "The sheep weren't just killed," another voice added, lower and heavy with dread. "They were arranged in some kind of unholy pattern, a ritual-like." Murmurs of fear rippled through the crowd. Isolde's confusion deepened. This was no random accusation. Someone had deliberately staged an incident to incite the villagers against her. But who would do such a thing, and why now? As the crowd's anger grew, Isolde began to retreat. Whatever answers the mysterious message promised, they weren't worth being caught by an angry mob. But as she turned to slip away, a child's voice rang out with terrifying clarity. "There! It's Red Eyes! I saw her by the granary!" All heads turned in her direction. For one frozen moment, Isolde stood exposed in the light spilling from a nearby cottage window, her hood having slipped back just enough to reveal the gleam of her unnatural eyes. Then instinct took over, and she ran. She might have escaped if not for the iron pot stacked outside the blacksmith's shop. In her haste, she collided with them, sending them crashing to the ground with a cacophony that shattered the night's stillness. Before she could recover, strong hands seized her arms, and the village constable's gruff voice ordered her bound. "No!" she protested, struggling against the men who held her. "I've done nothing. The sheep, it wasn't me." "Save your lies, monster," Lady Rowan spat, pushing to the front of the crowd. "We know what you are. The Alpha King will know how to deal with creatures like you." "The Alpha King?" Isolde repeated, momentarily ceasing her struggles. "What does King Thorn have to do with a village matter?" The constable, a grizzled beta wolf named Herrick, who had always treated her with gruff fairness during her infrequent visits to the market, wouldn't meet her eyes as iron shackles were locked around her wrists. "Royal decree," he muttered. "All matters of shapeshifter crimes go directly to the throne for judgment. No local sentencing permitted." "But I'm not—" she began, then stopped. She wasn't a shapeshifter, true, but she bore the marks of one, and denying her nature would only invite closer inspection of her features, which would raise questions she couldn't afford to answer. Better to be a nameless forest monster than the missing daughter of Lord Griffin. "Please," she tried again, keeping her voice low and steady. "I've lived peacefully in these woods for years. I've harmed no one, taken only what I needed to survive. Why would I suddenly slaughter a flock of sheep?" "The ways of dark magic are beyond honest folks' understanding," Lady Rowan declared loudly. "Perhaps you needed blood for some unholy ritual. Perhaps your true nature has finally overcome whatever restraint you've shown. It matters not. The king will see justice done." As they dragged her toward a waiting cart, already crowded with other prisoners, Isolde caught a glimpse of movement near Widow Hendrick's cottage, the supposed site of the slaughter. There, in the moonlight, a flock of sheep grazed peacefully in their pen, woolly shapes moving undisturbed against the darkness. Her eyes widened in understanding. There had been no slaughter, no ritual killing. The entire accusation was fabrication, designed to ensure her capture and transport to the capital, to the Alpha King, the message, the raven, the false accusation, all part of an elaborate plan to bring her before the throne without raising suspicions. But why such complexity? And orchestrated by whom? The cart into which she was roughly deposited was already occupied by a motley collection of prisoners, thieves and poachers by the look of them, bound for judgment in the capital. They shrank from her as she was seated among them, whispers passing between them at the sight of her red eyes gleaming in the darkness. "Heard the king grows harsher these days," muttered a gap-toothed man who smelled strongly of cheap spirits, "all on account of his sisters." "Poor princesses," sighed a milkmaid whose hands were bound before her, "fading like they're drained of life, worn shoes found outside their chambers each morning, though they never leave their rooms." "Magic!" hissed a thin man with the quick eyes of a practiced thief. "What else could it be? Remember the merchant's son who tried to solve the mystery? Vanished without a trace. The hedge witch from Lower Marsh, too. People don't even dare to try anymore." "Does the king offer any reward?" whispered the milkmaid. "What good's a reward if you never return to claim it?" the thief retorted. Isolde listened intently, pieces of the puzzle beginning to align in her mind. 6 princesses growing weaker each day, people disappearing when they tried to help, and a king desperate enough to offer any reward. The message made more sense now. Someone believed she could succeed where others had failed. But who would have such faith in a cursed woman the world had forgotten? Who even knew she still existed, let alone possessed knowledge that might help the princesses? The journey to the capital took 3 days, the cart trundling along increasingly well-maintained roads as they approached the heart of the kingdom. Isolde kept to herself, hood drawn low, speaking to no one. The other prisoners gave her a wide berth, fear overcoming even the normal desire for companionship in adversity. Only the milkmaid, a young woman named Brenna, occasionally offered her water or a crust of the hard bread provided for their sustenance. "They say you're some kind of monster," Brenna said on the 3rd day, voice barely audible over the cart's creaking. "But I saw you last spring in the market, trading herbs for cloth. You healed my cousin's baby when the fever took hold, and no one else could help. Monster wouldn't do that." Isolde remained silent, but inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. Small kindnesses were rare enough in her life that each one registered like a physical touch. "Heard the constable call you Red Eyes," Brenna continued. "Got a proper name?" After a moment's hesitation, Isolde replied, "They call me Red Eyes. That's enough." "Well, Red Eyes," the milkmaid said with a hint of a smile, "whatever awaits us at the capital, I'm glad to have met you. World needs more healers, monsters or not." The capital of Ravenhurst rose before them like a mountain of stone and ambition, its towers piercing the sky, its walls gleaming white in the autumn sunlight. Isolde had never seen the city before, though she had read descriptions in her books. Nothing had prepared her for its sheer scale, the sprawling markets, the towering cathedrals, the endless flow of humanity through streets that seemed to stretch to the horizon. At its center, dominating the highest hill, stood Ironwood Fortress, ancestral seat of the Alpha Kings. Built from black granite quarried from the northern mountains, its towers and battlements seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, a stark contrast to the white stone of the city below. As their cart passed through the massive iron gates, Isolde felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon her, the accumulated power of generations of alpha rulers concentrated in stone and steel. The prisoners were herded through courtyards and corridors, past guards in gleaming armor bearing the ironwood tree sigil of the royal house. Isolde kept her head down, mind racing. If she was brought before the king with the other prisoners, she would be judged as Red Eyes, the forest monster. Her true identity would remain hidden, but so would any chance to help the princesses, assuming she even could. But if she revealed herself as Isolde Griffin, daughter of a northern lord, questions would follow. Where had she been these 3 years? What had happened to transform her? Questions that would inevitably lead back to Evangeline and her curse, to the Brunswick family's connections to ancient magic. Such revelations could have political repercussions far beyond her personal situation. Their group finally arrived at the Great Hall, a vast chamber so immense that their footsteps echoed like distant thunder against the vaulted ceiling. Unlike the exterior of the fortress, the hall was filled with light and wonder. Massive windows of colored glass depicted the history of the Ironwood dynasty, casting rainbow patterns across the polished stone floor. Tapestries of exquisite craftsmanship hung between the windows, showing great battles, legendary hunts, and the shifting forms of royal shapeshifters. But it was the center of the hall that drew and held Isolde's gaze. There, rising from a circular pool of still water, grew a tree unlike any she had ever seen. Its trunk and branches seemed fashioned from pure gold, catching the light from the windows and reflecting it back 100-fold. Leaves that shimmered with their own inner luminescence rustled gently, though no breeze stirred the air of the hall. Fruits like captured sunlight hung heavy from its boughs, emanating a subtle fragrance that reminded Isolde of summer mornings and possibilities not yet explored. "The king's treasure tree," Brenna whispered beside her, voice hushed with awe. "They say all the wealth and power of the Ironwood line flows from its fruit. The king prizes it above his crown." Reluctantly, Isolde tore her gaze from the magnificent tree as the prisoners were arranged in a line before the dais where the throne stood. And what a throne it was, fashioned not from gold or silver, but from ironwood itself, black as midnight and seemingly impervious to time. Upon it sat a man who embodied the same qualities. King Thorn Ironwood was perhaps 45, but looked older, his face weathered by responsibility and recent worry. His black hair, threaded with silver at the temples, was pulled back in the traditional warrior's knot of the Alpha line. A short beard, similarly streaked with gray, framed a mouth that seemed unaccustomed to smiling. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, storm gray and piercing, taking the measure of each prisoner as the charges against them were read. At his feet, arranged on cushions placed around the dais, lay 6 young women of extraordinary beauty, all bearing the same raven hair and gray eyes as the king, though their features were softer, more delicate. The princesses, Isolde realized, feeling a shock at their condition. They were pale as winter moonlight, their lovely faces drawn with exhaustion, bodies so still they might have been carved from alabaster, but for the slight rise and fall of their chests. They looked, Isolde thought with clinical detachment, like victims of a slow, careful bloodletting, not enough to kill quickly, but sufficient to drain life over time. When her turn came to be judged, the herald reading the charges seemed almost embarrassed by their flimsiness. The accused, known as Red Eyes, stands charged with destruction of property and suspected dark rituals involving animal sacrifice in the village of Thorn Hollow. King Thorn's storm-gray eyes fixed upon her hooded figure, narrowing slightly. "Show yourself," he commanded, his voice deep and rough-edged, like stones tumbling down a mountainside. Isolde hesitated, then slowly lowered her hood. Gasps swept through the assembled courtiers. Someone screamed. A guard made the sign against evil. But the king remained unmoved, studying her transformed features with clinical interest rather than disgust. "A curse, then," he said finally. "Yes, Your Majesty," Isolde replied, keeping her voice steady, despite the fear coursing through her. "And do you deny the charges against you?" "I do deny them, Your Majesty. I harmed no animals, performed no rituals. I have lived peacefully in the forest these 3 years, trading herbs and healing knowledge with those brave enough to seek me out." The king leaned forward slightly, interest sharpening his gaze. "You speak well for one who lives wild in the forest." Isolde chose her next words carefully. "I was not always as you see me now, Your Majesty." "Few cursed individuals begin that way," he replied dryly. "What is your true name? Or has your curse stolen that from you as well?" She hesitated, balancing risks against potential advantages. If she revealed herself as Lord Griffin's daughter, it would create a diplomatic incident. If she remained anonymous, she might lose whatever opportunity had been orchestrated by the sender of the mysterious message. Before she could decide, one of the princesses stirred on her cushion, lifting her head with visible effort. It was the youngest, a girl of perhaps 16, whose resemblance to the king was particularly striking. "Brother," she said, her voice thin as winter sunlight, "this one is different from the others you've judged. There is knowledge in her eyes, not just hunger, and courage, not just fear." The king's expression softened as he looked at his sister. "What would you suggest, Lyra?" The princess's gaze fixed on Isolde with unexpected intensity. "Ask her about the dancing." A hushed murmur swept through the hall. The king's jaw tightened, but he nodded once, returning his attention to Isolde. "You heard my sister. What do you know of dancing?" The moment had come, though Isolde still didn't understand who had arranged it or why. She drew herself up to her full height, meeting the king's gaze directly. "I know that 6 princesses fade while dancing in dreamlight," she said clearly, using the exact words from the mysterious message. "I know the Alpha seeks one who can see beyond shadows." The effect was immediate and dramatic. The king surged to his feet, hand going to the ceremonial sword at his side. Guards stepped forward, hands on weapons. The other princesses stirred on their cushions, exchanging glances of surprise and speculation. "Who sent you?" King Thorn demanded, voice sharp as a blade. "Who told you these things?" "A message came to me 3 days ago," Isolde replied truthfully. "Delivered by a raven bearing a scroll sealed with blue wax. I do not know the sender." "Impossible," the king growled. "The matter of my sister's condition is known only to those within the innermost circles of the court. No outsider could have such knowledge." "Yet I stand before you, speaking of things I should not know," Isolde countered, surprising herself with her boldness. "I believe I was brought here deliberately, Your Majesty, to offer help where others have failed." "And what help could a cursed forest dweller offer 6 princesses of royal blood?" The skepticism in his voice was cutting. Isolde weighed her response carefully. "I have studied ancient texts that speak of similar afflictions. Princesses who dance each night though their chambers are locked. Shoes worn through by morning though they never leave their beds. Life force slowly drained away by forces beyond mortal understanding." The hall had gone completely silent, every eye fixed upon her. Even the princesses were fully alert now, watching her with expressions ranging from hope to suspicion. "Others have attempted to solve this mystery," the king said after a long pause. "Men of learning, women of power, none have returned to report their findings. Why should you succeed where they have failed?" The question hung in the air, and Isolde realized the truth of her situation with sudden clarity. This was her own test, separate from whatever mystery surrounded the princesses. King Thorn needed to be convinced that she was worth the risk, that she would not simply become another disappearance to add to his growing list of failures. "Because I have nothing left to lose," she said simply. "I exist between worlds already, neither fully human nor fully wolf. I have walked the boundaries between what is and what seems to be, and I carry knowledge of ancient magics that few living scholars possess." She paused, then added with quiet confidence, "But most importantly, Your Majesty, I cannot be bribed, threatened, or seduced away from my purpose. The curse that makes others fear me also makes me immune to the temptations that might have led others astray." King Thorn studied her for what felt like an eternity, his storm-gray eyes seeming to strip away pretense, searching for truth beneath her words. Finally, he resumed his seat on the ironwood throne. "You speak with conviction, Red Eyes, but words are wind. If you wish to prove your worth, you must accept a challenge far more dangerous than any forest dwelling." "I accept," Isolde said without hesitation, seizing the opportunity. A sound that might have been a short laugh escaped the king. "You haven't heard the terms. They matter not. Any challenge is preferable to returning to a life of shadows and solitude." The king's expression shifted subtly, something like approval flickering in his eyes. "Very well. 3 nights, beginning tonight. Solve the mystery of my sister's affliction, discover what drains their life force night after night, and you shall have freedom and any favor within my power to grant." Isolde nodded, but before she could speak, the king continued, his voice hardening. "But know this, if you fail, or if you attempt to flee, or if you are discovered to be part of the conspiracy against my family, your execution will be public and prolonged. The people of Ravenhurst will remember for generations what happens to those who trifle with the ironwood throne." The threat was delivered with such matter-of-fact certainty that Isolde had no doubt of its truth. Yet fear had long ago lost its power to influence her decisions. 3 years of living as a monster among humans had taught her that death was often preferable to certain kinds of life. "I understand, Your Majesty," she said calmly. 3 nights to solve the mystery, beginning tonight. I accept your terms without reservation." For the first time, something like genuine surprise crossed the king's features. He had expected protest, perhaps, or at least negotiation. Her immediate acceptance seemed to intrigue him. "Guards," he commanded, "escort Red Eyes to the eastern tower. She is to be given quarters adjoining the princess's chambers and provided with whatever she requires for her task." He fixed Isolde with one last penetrating look. "I suggest you use the remaining hours of daylight wisely, Curse-bearer. Night approaches, and with it your first opportunity to succeed, or to join the ranks of the disappeared." As the guards led her from the great hall, Isolde glanced back at the golden tree rising from its pool. For an instant, she thought she saw the leaves tremble, as if disturbed by an unfelt breeze. A trick of the light, surely, or the exhaustion of the journey catching up with her. But as she was escorted through corridors of polished stone toward the eastern tower, Isolde could not shake the feeling that the tree had responded to her presence, that it had, in some inexplicable way, recognized her, and that it had been waiting for her to arrive. Isolde was lodged in a small chamber adjoining the princess's rooms, provided with a narrow cot and a single guttering candle for light. Though Spartan, the room showed signs of recent cleaning. Dust-free surfaces, fresh linens, a pitcher of water beside a porcelain basin. The guard who had escorted her, a broad-shouldered beta wolf with graying temples, took his post outside her door with a warning glance. "I'll be watching you," he growled, hand resting meaningfully on the pommel of his sword. "One wrong move toward their highnesses, and curse or no curse, I'll run you through." Isolde inclined her head in acknowledgement, but offered no reply. She had expected no less. The guard's hostility was familiar, merely a variation of the suspicion she had faced these past 3 years. At least here in the palace, her purpose was clear. Solve the mystery or die trying, a refreshing simplicity after years of existing in the uncertain margins of society. When the guard had positioned himself outside, Isolde explored her small chamber. A narrow window overlooked the palace grounds, offering a view of formal gardens illuminated by the setting sun. In the distance, the city of Ravenhurst sprawled toward the horizon, its buildings catching the golden light. She allowed herself a moment to absorb the sight. After years in the forest, the vast expanse of human civilization seemed both foreign and achingly familiar. The sound of soft footsteps drew her attention from the window. The door opened without a knock, revealing one of the 6 princesses, the youngest, Lyra, who had spoken in Isolde's defense in the throne room. Up close, the girl's condition was even more alarming. Her skin was nearly translucent, blue veins visible beneath the surface like delicate river paths on a map. Her eyes, though the same storm gray as her brother's, were sunken and ringed with shadows. She moved as if every step required conscious effort. Yet there was strength in her gaze as she regarded Isolde without fear, studying her transformed features with open curiosity rather than disgust. "You're not what I expected," the princess said, her voice soft but clear. "What did you expect, Your Highness?" Isolde asked, keeping her own voice gentle, careful not to display her elongated canines. "Someone desperate, reckless." Lyra's lips quirked in a small smile. "You seem calculated, as though you've already worked through several possible outcomes of this encounter." Isolde couldn't help but be impressed by the young woman's perception. "When one lives as I do, Princess, one learns to consider all possibilities before speaking or acting." Lyra nodded, then gestured to a small side table Isolde hadn't noticed before. "I've brought you something." On the table sat a steaming cup, the fragrance of herbs rising from its surface. Isolde regarded it warily, remembering another cup offered in false friendship years ago. "Your Highness is kind, but you think I might poison you?" Lyra's laugh was like winter wind through bare branches, hollow but musical. "To what end? If you die, we lose yet another chance at salvation. Besides," she added with a touch of wryness, "in my current state, I can barely walk across the room. Murdering mysterious strangers is quite beyond my abilities." Despite herself, Isolde smiled. She liked this forthright princess with her clear eyes and sharp mind. Still, caution prevailed. "What is it?" "A tea made from silverleaf and nightbloom. It enhances awareness during twilight hours, the time between day and night when boundaries thin." Isolde's interest sharpened. "You know of such boundaries?" Lyra's expression grew somber. "I know only what I experience each night, the pull toward sleep that cannot be resisted, the dreams of dancing that leave me exhausted by morning, the feeling of something, feeding on my essence, drop by drop." She shivered visibly. "My sisters experience the same, though we rarely speak of it. What would be the point? No one has found a solution." "Until now, perhaps," Isolde suggested, picking up the cup and inhaling its fragrance more carefully. The herbs were familiar. Silverleaf grew in moonlit glades, while nightbloom opened only during the full moon. Both were known for their properties of enhancing perception, particularly of magical currents. There was no scent of moonshade or heartsbane, the herbs Evangeline had used in her poisoned wine. She took a small sip, letting the liquid linger on her tongue before swallowing. The taste was bitter but clean, with complex undertones of forest and starlight. "Thank you, Princess. This may indeed prove helpful." Lyra nodded, her strength visibly flagging. "I must return to my chambers. The others will be wondering where I've gone, and the sun is setting. Soon we will have no choice but to sleep." The way she spoke the last word made it sound like a death sentence. "One question before you go," Isolde said quickly. "The message that summoned me here, do you know who sent it?" Lyra hesitated, something flashing behind her eyes, knowledge or perhaps fear. "I cannot say," she replied carefully. "But know this, you are not the first to try, but you may be the last who can help us. We grow weaker each night. Soon there will be nothing left to save." With those ominous words, she departed, leaving Isolde alone with the tea and her thoughts. Outside the window, the sun had vanished below the horizon, leaving the sky stained with deepening shades of purple and indigo. Twilight, the hour between worlds, as her mother had once described it. The time when magic stirred in the blood of shapeshifters and the veil between realms grew thin. Isolde settled onto the cot, cup warming her hands, and waited. If the princesses were being compelled to sleep, it would happen soon. She would need to be ready. The silver-leaf tea was taking effect, sharpening her senses. The candle's flame seemed to cast patterns that shifted and danced across the walls. Sounds from elsewhere in the palace, distant conversations, the clank of armor as guards changed positions, the soft rustling of servants preparing the castle for night, reached her with unusual clarity. Even her sense of smell intensified, bringing her the scents of stone and beeswax, distant kitchens and garden flowers. An hour passed, then another. The palace settled into the deep quiet of night. Isolde remained alert, fighting the natural pull of sleep, focused on any sound from the princess's chambers. The guard outside her door had been replaced, she noted, by a younger man whose breathing suggested he was struggling to remain awake. Then, just as the palace clock struck midnight, she heard it. The soft whisper of a door opening in the princess's chambers, followed by the barely perceptible sound of multiple feet moving across stone floors. No voices, no conversation, just the synchronized movement of 6 people trying to be silent. Isolde rose and pressed her ear against the wall, separating her room from theirs. The footsteps receded, suggesting they were moving toward the far end of their chambers. Curious. The guard had mentioned nothing about the princesses leaving their rooms, yet they were clearly moving about. She had to follow, but the guard outside her door presented a problem. Cautiously, Isolde opened her door a crack and peered out. The young guard sat slumped against the wall, head lolling in sleep. His breathing was deep and regular, not natural sleep, she realized, but induced. The princesses must have given him the same sleeping draught they offered every night to those who watched them. Silently, she slipped past him and made her way to the princesses' chambers. Their door was unlocked, which struck her as odd given the purported concern for their safety. Inside, she found a suite of 6 bedchambers adjoining a central sitting room, all luxuriously appointed with silks and velvets in the ironwood colors of black, silver, and deep blue. The rooms were empty. The beds were still made, unslept in. There was no sign of the princesses, no obvious exit except the main door through which she had entered. Isolde circled the sitting room, running her hands along the walls, searching for hidden mechanisms or secret passages. In a castle this ancient, such architectural secrets would be common. Her enhanced senses, sharpened by Lyra's tea, detected a subtle current of air from behind a large tapestry depicting the first Alpha King of the Ironwood line. Pushing the heavy fabric aside, she found no door or opening, merely a smooth stone wall. Yet the air movement was undeniable. She pressed her palms against the cold stone, feeling for irregularities, for any hint of a mechanism. Then she noticed something curious. The Alpha King in the tapestry wore a ring set with a blood-red stone on his right hand. The same ring King Thorn had worn today in the Great Hall, a family heirloom passed down through generations. On the wall directly behind where the tapestry depicted the ring, she felt a small circular depression in the stone. Isolde smiled grimly. Hidden in plain sight, accessible only to those who knew the family's secrets. She pressed firmly on the depression, and a section of wall slid back with well-oiled silence, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. No light illuminated the passage, but her cursed eyes had one advantage. They saw clearly in darkness. The stairs spiraled downward, deep into the bedrock beneath the castle. The air grew cooler as she descended, carrying strange scents, damp stone, ancient dust, and something else, something sweet and otherworldly that reminded her of the treasure tree in the Great Hall. After what seemed like hundreds of steps, the staircase ended at a plain wooden door, unornamented and seemingly ancient. It stood slightly ajar, a faint silvery light spilling from the crack. Isolde approached cautiously, listening. From beyond came sounds that didn't belong in an underground chamber, flowing water, rustling leaves, and distant music unlike any she had heard before. Ethereal melodies played on instruments that seemed to combine the resonance of harps with the haunting quality of glass bells. She pushed the door open slowly, prepared to duck back if discovered. The sight beyond stole her breath away. She stood at the edge of a vast underground cavern, its ceiling lost in shadows high above. But this was no ordinary cave. The floor was covered in lush grass that glowed with faint phosphorescence, dotted with flowers that seemed fashioned from liquid silver and pale gold. Trees with trunks of burnished metal and leaves of crystal lined a broad avenue that stretched toward a lake of incredible stillness, its surface reflecting the strange, sourceless light that illuminated the entire cavern. And walking down this avenue, no longer appearing weak or exhausted, but moving with fluid grace, were the 6 princesses. They had changed from their simple day gowns into dresses that seemed woven from starlight and shadow, each unique yet sharing the same otherworldly quality. Their raven hair was adorned with jewels that caught the light like captured stars, and they moved in perfect unison, as if responding to music only they could hear. Isolde crouched behind a metallic bush, watching as the princesses reached the shore of the silver lake. There, waiting in 6 elegant boats, crafted from what appeared to be polished ebony, stood 6 young men of extraordinary beauty. They were tall and slender, with features too perfect to be human, high cheekbones, luminous skin, eyes like liquid gems. Each extended a hand to help a princess into his boat, the gestures performed with balletic precision. None of the 12 figures spoke. They moved as if in a silent choreography, each step and gesture predetermined. The boatmen took up silver oars and began to row across the lake, leaving ripples that shimmered like scattered diamonds on the dark water. Isolde knew she had to follow. She needed to see where they were going, what happened when they reached the far shore. But crossing the open expanse to the lake would expose her, and there was no 7th boat waiting. "Does the lady need a ride?" The voice came from directly beside her, smooth and tinged with amusement. Isolde spun around, heart hammering, to find a man lounging against a crystal tree trunk, arms crossed casually over his chest. His appearance struck her immediately as different from the boatmen. Where they were ethereal and almost delicate in their beauty, he was substantial, tall and broad-shouldered, with features that combined strength and elegance. His hair was black as midnight, falling in waves to his shoulders, and his eyes shifted between silver and deep blue, like the lake itself. He was smiling at her, one eyebrow raised in inquiry, and Isolde realized with a jolt that her hood had fallen back during her startled movement. Her cursed features were fully exposed to his gaze, yet he showed no disgust or fear, merely that same amused interest. "Who are you?" she demanded, pulling her hood forward again by instinct. "Someone who appreciates an uninvited guest," he replied, his voice rich with suppressed laughter, "especially one brave enough to follow 6 princesses into the unknown." He gestured toward a 7th boat she hadn't noticed before, smaller than the others, but crafted with equal care. "I ask again, does the lady need a ride?" Isolde hesitated. Every instinct warned that this was dangerous, that accepting help from this stranger might lead to a trap. Yet the princesses were already halfway across the lake. If she didn't follow now, she might lose them entirely. "I have nothing to pay you with," she said cautiously. "Then I shall require no payment," he replied with an elegant shrug. "Consider it a courtesy from one curious soul to another." His casual acceptance of her presence and her appearance was disarming. After 3 years of being treated as a monster, such nonchalance was almost intoxicating. Still, caution prevailed. "Why would you help me?" she pressed. "You don't know my purpose here." The stranger's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too white, too perfect. "Perhaps I find your purpose aligns with my own interests. Perhaps I simply enjoy disrupting routines. Or perhaps," his voice dropped lower, "I've grown tired of watching the same drama unfold night after night without variation." That caught her attention. "You've watched this before? The princesses crossing the lake?" "Every night for longer than you might believe," he confirmed, something darker flashing behind his smile. "Now, will you accept my offer, or shall we stand here debating until your quarry disappears from view?" The princesses' boats were indeed growing distant. Isolde made her decision quickly. "Yes," she said, "I accept your offer." He gestured toward the small boat with a flourish. "After you, then." Isolde stepped carefully into the craft, which barely rocked despite her movement. It was as stable as if it rested on solid ground rather than water. The stranger followed, settling opposite her and taking up the oars with practiced ease. With smooth, powerful strokes, he propelled them across the lake, rapidly closing the distance to the princesses. "You know who I am," Isolde said as they glided over the dark water. It wasn't a question. "I know what you appear to be," he corrected. "A cursed woman seeking answers in a place where few mortals tread. Whether that is truly who you are remains to be seen." "And you?" she countered. "What do you appear to be?" His laugh was unexpectedly musical. "Curious, interested, perhaps even helpful. Whether that is truly who I am also remains to be seen." He studied her with those shifting silver-blue eyes. "You may call me Asher, if names matter to you." Isolde doubted that was his true name, but she accepted the offering for what it was, a placeholder in their strange, careful conversation. "They call me Red Eyes," she replied. "How terribly unimaginative of them," Asher remarked dryly. "Though accurate, I suppose. Your eyes do indeed shine like rubies in shadow." The way he referred to her curse, as if commenting on her choice of clothing rather than a horrific transformation, continued to unsettle her. She changed tactics. "Where are we? This place cannot exist beneath the Ironwood Castle." "What makes you so certain?" Asher asked, still rowing with that effortless rhythm. "The world is full of spaces that exist between other spaces, thresholds that connect what should remain separate. You of all people should understand this concept." "What do you mean?" He gestured toward her with a tilt of his chin. "Your form, neither fully human nor fully wolf, but caught in the threshold between. You exist between states, between identities. Is it so difficult to believe a place might exist in similar fashion?" His insight into her condition startled her. Few had ever spoken of her curse with such perception, as if he understood not just its appearance, but its essence. Before she could respond, he continued, "We're approaching the shore. I suggest you prepare yourself. What lies ahead may challenge your understanding of reality even further." Isolde turned to look ahead. The far shore of the lake had resolved from darkness into a vista of impossible beauty. A landscape of terraced gardens rose before them, illuminated by what appeared to be stars embedded in the cavern ceiling high above. Fountains of silver water played among sculptures of such intricate detail that they seemed alive, merely paused in mid-motion. And at the top of the terraces stood a pavilion of crystal and silver, its spires reaching toward those artificial stars, its walls seeming to shimmer between solid and translucent. Music floated from this structure, more distinct now, the same ethereal melody she had heard faintly when first entering the cavern, but fuller, richer, compelling in its strange harmonies. It pulled at something deep within her, awakening an almost primal urge to move, to dance, to lose herself in its rhythms. The princess's boats had already reached the shore. The 6 young men helped their companions disembark with the same formal grace they had displayed earlier, then led them up a broad staircase of what appeared to be polished moonstone toward the crystal pavilion. Asher guided their smaller craft to a landing slightly apart from where the others had docked. As he secured the boat, Isolde noticed that the princesses and their escorts had already ascended halfway up the terraced gardens, moving with synchronized precision that seemed both beautiful and somehow disturbing in its perfection. "They're being compelled," she murmured, more to herself than to her strange companion. "This isn't voluntary movement." "Very good," Asher approved, sounding genuinely impressed. "Most observers assume they simply enjoy the dancing. Few recognize the compulsion beneath the beauty." "This has happened before," Isolde said, remembering his earlier comment. "Others have followed them here." Asher's expression turned solemn for the first time. "Many have found their way to the Twilight Court over the years. Few have returned to speak of it." "The Twilight Court," Isolde repeated, tasting the name. It felt right somehow, a perfect description for this liminal place that existed between darkness and light, reality and dream. "What happens to those who don't return?" Instead of answering directly, Asher gestured toward the gardens through which they would need to pass. "Look carefully at what appears to be merely ornamental." Following his gaze, Isolde studied the garden more intently. What she had taken for decorative trees lining the pathways suddenly resolved into a more disturbing image. They weren't trees at all, but people. Human figures frozen in mid-motion, their bodies transformed into living wood and metal, faces captured in expressions of wonder or horror or resignation. "The previous champions," she breathed, understanding dawning with terrible clarity. "The ones who tried to save the princesses. Some of them," Asher confirmed. "Others met different fates. The Twilight Court offers many ways for mortals to contribute to its splendor." Fear crawled up Isolde's spine, but she forced it down. She hadn't survived 3 years as a cursed outcast to be cowed now. "You're warning me," she observed. "Why? What stake do you have in my success or failure?" Asher studied her for a long moment, his silver blue eyes unreadable. "Let's just say I find you more interesting than your predecessors. It would be a shame to see you join them quite so quickly." He offered his arm with courtly formality. "Shall we follow? The night's revelations are just beginning." Isolde ignored the offered arm, but fell into step beside him as they began to ascend the moonstone staircase. The music grew louder with each step, its strange harmonies weaving around her like silken threads, tugging at her consciousness. She found herself wanting to move in time with its rhythms, to surrender to its patterns. Only by focusing intently on the physical sensations of walking, the pressure of each step, the whisper of her cloak against stone, could she resist its pull. "The music," she said, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "It's enchanted." "Everything here is enchanted," Asher replied. His voice seemed to cut through the music's influence, anchoring her to reality. "The water, the air, the very ground beneath your feet. This is the realm of the Fae, where magic isn't worked, but simply is." "The Fae," Isolde echoed. The word resonated with memories of childhood stories her mother had told. Beautiful, immortal beings who stole mortal children, who granted wishes with terrible prices attached, who danced in moonlit circles and lured travelers to their doom with unearthly beauty. They reached the top of the stairs, where the crystal pavilion stood open to the star-studded cavern sky. Inside, a scene of breathtaking splendor unfolded. Hundreds of beings danced in intricate patterns across a floor that shifted between solid crystal and flowing water. They were similar to the boatmen in their otherworldly beauty, but with infinite variations, some with hair like liquid silver or gold, others with skin that shimmered with iridescent patterns, all moving with inhuman grace to the compelling music. And at the center of it all danced the 6 princesses with their partners, their movements synchronized and perfect. Yet something was wrong. Looking more carefully, Isolde saw that while the princesses' bodies moved with fluid grace, their faces remained blank, eyes open but unseeing. In contrast to the vibrant animation of the Fae dancers around them, they seemed like exquisite puppets manipulated by invisible strings. "They're not conscious," she said, watching as Princess Lyra executed a complex turn that should have been impossible in her weakened state. "Their bodies are here, their life force is being consumed, but their minds remain in a dream state," Asher confirmed. "More merciful that way, perhaps. They believe they are having pleasant dreams of dancing, while in reality—" He gestured toward the nearest princess, whose skin seemed to be growing more translucent before their very eyes, tiny motes of light rising from her like steam from hot water, only to be absorbed by her Fae dance partner. "Their life force is being harvested," Isolde realized with horror. "Each night, a little more is taken, leaving them weaker by morning." "Precisely. A careful feeding, not enough to kill quickly, but sufficient to sustain the court's needs. Elegant in its way." His casual description of the princess's slow destruction sparked anger in Isolde's chest. "You speak as if you admire this parasitism." Asher's expression remained neutral. "I neither admire nor condemn it. It simply is the nature of the Twilight Court, the price of crossing boundaries that should remain separate." Before Isolde could respond, her attention was drawn to the far end of the pavilion, where a dais rose above the dancing floor. Upon it sat a figure of such overwhelming presence that she wondered how she had missed him until now. He reclined on a throne fashioned from what appeared to be solidified moonlight, watching the revelry with an expression of profound ennui. His beauty exceeded even that of the dancers, features so perfect they almost hurt to look upon, hair like spun darkness falling to his waist, eyes that contained entire galaxies. "The Fae King," she murmured. "Indeed," Asher confirmed. "Sovereign of the Twilight Court, master of the spaces between, lord of dreams and nightmares, among other titles." Something in his tone caught her attention, a subtle inflection she couldn't quite identify. "You know him," she said. It wasn't a question. "All who dwell in twilight know their king," Asher replied, his voice carefully neutral. "Some more intimately than others." Isolde's mind raced, pieces of the puzzle shifting and rearranging themselves. "The princesses are here because of him. This is his doing." "Not precisely," Asher corrected. "The eldest princess made a bargain with him and lost. This was the price agreed upon." "What kind of bargain?" "The kind mortals should know better than to make with the Fae," he replied cryptically. "She wanted something only he could provide. He named his price. She agreed, then failed to deliver her part. Consequences followed." "And her sisters?" "They made no bargain. They share her blood. In Fae law, that makes them equally liable for her debt." The injustice of it ignited something fierce in Isolde's chest. "That's monstrous." "That's Fae," Asher countered simply. "Their laws are not human laws. Their morality is not human morality. They do not lie, but truth means something different to them. They keep their bargains to the letter, but the spirit is irrelevant. They are creatures of rules and boundaries, but those rules would seem arbitrary and cruel to human understanding." As they conversed, they had been moving along the periphery of the pavilion, observing without joining the dance. Now they stood close enough to the dais for Isolde to see the Fae King more clearly. His expression of boredom had deepened, if possible, as he watched the princesses dance. There was no malice in his gaze, no pleasure in their suffering, merely the dispassionate observation of one who has seen the same performance too many times. "He doesn't even enjoy it anymore," Isolde observed. "This slow destruction of 6 young women. It's become routine to him." "Immortality breeds terrible boredom," Asher said quietly. "When you have existed for millennia, even cruelty loses its savor eventually." Isolde studied the king, mind working furiously. "There must be a way to break this cycle, a loophole in their bargain, a rule that can be exploited." "There is always a way," Asher agreed. "The question is whether you're clever enough to find it, brave enough to attempt it, and willing to pay whatever price it demands." "I've already agreed to die if I fail," she reminded him. Asher's laugh was soft but genuine. "Death is a simple price, easily paid and quickly over. The Fae tend to be more creative in their requirements." Before she could question him further, one of the dancing Fae noticed their presence and pointed, whispering to his companions. Soon, dozens of inhuman eyes were turned in their direction, conversations rippling through the crowd. The music faltered for a moment, then resumed with a subtly different melody. "We've been noticed," Asher observed unnecessarily, "which means our time for observation has ended. Soon you'll need to make a choice, retreat back across the lake and consider what you've learned, or step forward and engage directly with the Twilight Court." Isolde weighed her options. If she retreated now, she had valuable information to bring back to King Thorn. She knew where his sisters went each night, knew what was happening to them. But knowing the problem didn't equate to solving it. If she wanted to truly save the princesses, she would need to understand more about Fae laws and the specific bargain that had led to this situation. "If I engage directly," she asked, "what are the risks?" "Countless," Asher replied frankly. "The Fae are capricious by nature. Some might find you amusing, others threatening. Some might offer aid, others seek to entrap you in bargains of your own. The king himself might be intrigued by your presence, or he might order your transformation into one of his garden ornaments with a wave of his hand." Despite the dire warning, Isolde felt a curious calm settling over her. After 3 years of existing on the margins of humanity, feared and hated for her cursed form, the prospect of facing immortal beings who viewed her with mere curiosity rather than disgust held a strange appeal. "I'll stay," she decided. "I need to understand the rules of this place if I'm to have any hope of freeing the princesses." Asher studied her face, something like respect flickering in his silver blue eyes. "Bold," he murmured, "perhaps even wise in its way." He gestured toward a small side entrance to the pavilion, away from the main throng of dancers. "Then let us enter properly. Stay close to me. Speak carefully. And above all, accept nothing offered freely. No food, no drink, no gift, no favor. Everything here carries obligations you may not understand until it's too late." With those ominous words, he led her into the heart of the Twilight Court. As they entered the pavilion, the crystalline floor beneath their feet seemed to pulse with light, responding to their movements. The air grew thick with magic. Isolde could feel it against her skin, taste it on her tongue, a sensation both exhilarating and vaguely threatening, like standing at the edge of a great height. The music wound around them, no longer merely sound, but almost a physical entity, probing and testing as if trying to understand these newcomers. The Fae nearest their entry point ceased their dancing to stare openly at Isolde, their perfect features displaying expressions ranging from curiosity to disdain to hungry interest. They were more varied in appearance up close, some tall and willowy, others compact and quick-moving, skin tones spanning from alabaster to deepest ebony, all with an underlying luminescence that marked them as inhuman. "What is this creature you bring among us, Asher?" asked one, a female with hair like molten copper and eyes the color of summer leaves. "It reeks of mortality and wild magic." "A visitor," Asher replied smoothly. "One who seeks understanding rather than conflict." Another Fae, male and so slender he seemed nearly two-dimensional when viewed from certain angles, leaned close to inspect Isolde. "How delightfully malformed," he commented, as if discussing an interesting insect. "Neither one thing nor another. A threshold being, like yourself, Asher." The casual comparison between herself and Asher caught Isolde's attention, but before she could consider its implications, the copper-haired Fae spoke again. "She wears a curse like a second skin," she observed, circling Isolde with predatory grace. "Old magic, Brunswick magic. I can smell the witch's hand in it." Isolde stiffened at the mention of Brunswick, Evangeline's family name. How could this creature know the source of her curse? "The Brunswick witches have trafficked with our kind for centuries," the Fae continued, answering Isolde's unspoken question. "Their curses carry echoes of twilight. Fascinating that one has found her way here. I wonder if she knows what she truly seeks." "I seek to free the princesses from their compulsion," Isolde stated clearly, finding her voice at last, "to end their nightly suffering." Her words caused a ripple of reaction among the gathered Fae. Some laughed openly, while others exchanged glances laden with meaning she couldn't decipher. The copper-haired female's smile sharpened. "Bold," she said, echoing Asher's earlier assessment. "Or perhaps merely ignorant. Do you understand what you're interfering with, mortal? The bargain that binds the princesses is not some simple spell to be broken with good intentions." "Then explain it to me," Isolde challenged. "If Fae justice is truly as perfect as you claim, it should withstand scrutiny." A murmur ran through the crowd at her audacity. The slender male laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I like this one, Asher. She has spirit, despite her unfortunate appearance." "She asked a fair question," Asher replied, his tone carefully neutral. "Perhaps the court owes her a fair answer." The copper-haired Fae's expression turned calculating. "Perhaps," she allowed. "Or perhaps she should ask the king himself. After all, it was with him that the bargain was struck." All eyes turned toward the dais, where the Fae king continued to watch the proceedings with that same expression of elegant boredom. For a moment, Isolde thought he would ignore the implied suggestion, but then he made a small gesture with one long-fingered hand. Immediately the crowd parted to create a path from where she stood to the foot of his throne. Asher leaned close, his breath cool against her ear. "Be precise in your words," he whispered. "Ask only what you truly want to know. And remember, he cannot lie, but truth is a blade that cuts in many directions." With those cryptic words of advice, he straightened and gave her a slight nod of encouragement. Isolde squared her shoulders and walked the path that had been cleared for her, aware of hundreds of immortal eyes watching her progress. The music had shifted again, becoming quieter, more ominous, underscoring the gravity of the moment. As she approached the dais, she could see the 6 princesses still dancing nearby, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. Their movements had grown more frantic, their skin more translucent, the motes of life force rising from them at an accelerated rate. Whatever was happening to them, it was worsening as the night progressed. She reached the foot of the dais and looked up at the Fey King. Up close, his beauty was almost painful to behold. Perfect features arranged in an expression of mild interest, eyes shifting through colors she had no names for, presence so overwhelming that she had to force herself not to step back. "Approach, cursed one," he said, his voice like distant thunder wrapped in silk. "You wish to understand the fate of the dancing princesses. Ask, and I shall answer, for curiosity deserves satisfaction, even in one so uniquely formed as yourself." The last words might have been an insult, but his tone held no mockery, merely a clinical assessment of her appearance. Isolde kept her own expression neutral as she formulated her question. What was the bargain struck with the eldest princess, and what would be required to release all 6 from its terms? The Fey King's perfect lips curved in what might have been a smile. Direct, efficient. I appreciate economy of language. He straightened slightly in his throne, giving her question the consideration it deserved. Princess Eowyn came to the Twilight Court 1 year ago, drawn by dreams I sent her. She sought a cure for her brother's affliction, a madness that had begun to consume the Alpha King's mind, threatening the stability of your mortal realm. I offered a bargain. I would cure her brother's madness, restoring him to his full faculties and strength. In exchange, she would return to Twilight and serve as my consort for 1 turning of the seasons. Isolde processed this information quickly. King Thorn had indeed been rumored to be unstable a year ago, prone to violent outbursts and irrational decisions that had threatened alliances generations in the making. Then, seemingly overnight, he had returned to his former self, stern but fair, rational in his judgments, a strong leader for the kingdom. Everyone had attributed the change to natural recovery, or perhaps the influence of his advisors. No one had suspected Fey intervention. But Princess Eowyn didn't return as promised, she guessed. Precisely. The king's expression darkened momentarily. I fulfilled my part of the bargain. The Alpha King's mind was cleansed of the darkness corrupting it. But when the time came for Eowyn to honor her commitment, she refused. She hid behind mortal walls, behind her brother's protection, breaking her sworn word. "And so you punish all 6 sisters for one's broken promise," Isolde said, unable to keep a note of accusation from her voice. The Fey King regarded her coolly. "I extract what is owed from the only source available to me. The life force of 6 for a limited time equals the life force of 1 for the promised duration. It is mathematically precise, morally balanced." Human morality might disagree, but Isolde recognized the futility of arguing ethics with an immortal being who operated by entirely different principles. Instead, she focused on the second part of her question. And what would release them from this bargain? 3 possibilities exist, the king replied, holding up 3 long fingers. First, they may continue as they are until the debt is paid in full, approximately 30 more nights at the current rate of extraction. By then, they will be little more than empty vessels, alive but barely so, never to recover their full vitality. The clinical way he described their slow destruction sent a chill down Isolde's spine. Second, he continued, lowering one finger, Princess Eowyn may yet choose to honor her original commitment. 1 princess serving as consort for 1 turning of seasons would satisfy the debt for all. And the third option? Isolde pressed when he paused. The Fey King's multi-hued eyes focused on her with sudden intensity. A champion may stand in their place, one who willingly accepts 3 trials of my choosing. Should this champion succeed, the princesses go free. Should they fail? His smile revealed teeth too white and too sharp to be human. Well, my gardens always welcome new ornaments. The challenge was clear, the trap neatly laid. He expected her to volunteer, to place herself in competition against Fey magic and Fey rules, with failure the most likely outcome. It was exactly what she had come to do, of course, but something in his too-ready presentation of this option made her cautious. "How many champions have attempted these trials before me?" she asked. 17, he answered promptly. "None succeeded. Most adorn my gardens now. A few chose less decorative fates when given the option." 17 failures. 17 mortals who had tried and died or worse. The odds were clearly not in her favor. And yet, what choice did she have? The princesses grew weaker each night. King Thorn had given her 3 days to solve the mystery. If she returned without a solution, her own execution awaited. "Before I decide," she said carefully, "I would know more about these trials. What is their nature? What rules govern them?" The king's expression suggested he found her caution either amusing or impressive. She couldn't tell which. "The trials test intellect, compassion, and will, the 3 virtues mortals claim to value above all others. As for rules, they are simple. I cannot lie about the parameters of each trial. You cannot refuse a trial once begun. Magic may be used by either party, but direct physical harm is forbidden. 3 nights, 3 trials, 3 chances to succeed or fail." It seemed straightforward enough, though Isolde suspected that, like everything in the Twilight Court, the reality would be far more complex than the description. Still, she had learned enough to make her decision. "I accept the role of champion," she declared, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "I will face your trials to free the princesses from their debt." A murmur ran through the watching fae, a sound like wind through autumn leaves. The king's expression remained unchanged, but something flickered in those impossible eyes. Satisfaction, perhaps, or anticipation. "So be it," he said, his voice resonating with power that seemed to vibrate through the very floor beneath her feet. "The bargain is struck. 3 trials, beginning tomorrow night. Tonight, you observe only, learning what you will of our court and its ways. Return to the mortal realm with the dawn and prepare yourself as you see fit. When next the sun sets, your first trial awaits." With a casual wave of his hand, he dismissed her, turning his attention back to the dancers, as if she had already ceased to exist. The crowd of fae around her began to disperse, returning to their revels now that the entertainment of her audience had concluded. Asher appeared at her side, his expression unreadable. "Boldly done," he murmured, "though whether it was wisdom or folly remains to be seen." "I had little choice," Isolde replied, watching as the princesses continued their compelled dance, unaware of the bargain just struck on their behalf. "Either I try to free them through these trials, or I return empty-handed to face execution." "There is always choice," Asher countered. "You could have asked to join them in their dance, sharing their fate but avoiding your own. You could have offered yourself directly to the king as a replacement for Princess Elowyn. You could have fled across the lake, leaving both princesses and mortal realm behind." The suggestion startled her. Would any of those options have been accepted? His smile was enigmatic. "We'll never know now, will we? You chose your path, champion. Now you must walk it to its end." The word champion in his mouth seemed to carry layers of meaning she couldn't fully grasp. Before she could question him further, he offered his arm once more. "Come, dawn approaches in the mortal realm. We should return you to the castle before your absence is discovered." As they made their way back through the crystal pavilion toward the lake, Isolde felt the weight of what she had just committed to settling over her. 3 trials against fey magic and fey cunning, with the lives of 6 princesses hanging in the balance. The odds seemed impossible, yet as she glanced back at the dais, she caught the fey king watching her retreat, something like genuine interest finally breaking through his mask of boredom. In that moment, Isolde understood an essential truth about her situation. Impossible odds meant nothing to beings who had existed for millennia. The entertainment value lay not in the predictability of her failure, but in the slim possibility of her success. She would use that. Somehow, she would find a way to turn their own immortal ennui against them. As Asher helped her into the small boat that would carry them back across the Silver Lake, one last question occurred to her. The fey female mentioned Brunswick magic. She said the family has trafficked with your kind for centuries. What did she mean by that? Asher's hands stilled briefly on the oars before resuming their smooth motion. The The Brunswick witches have indeed maintained connections with Twilight longer than most mortal bloodlines. They are useful intermediaries, capable of working magic that bridges the gap between realms. In exchange, certain members of their family are granted knowledge and abilities beyond typical human capability. "Evangeline," Isolde murmured. "My stepmother. She cursed me with magic learned from the Fae." "Likely so," Asher agreed, "though the curse itself is of Brunswick design. We Fae have little interest in trapping beings between forms. We prefer clean transformations, all one thing or all another." The casual inclusion of himself among we Fae confirmed what Isolde had begun to suspect. Asher was not merely a resident of the Twilight Court, but one of its inhabitants, a Fae himself, albeit one who seemed to operate somewhat apart from the others. "Why are you helping me?" she asked directly. "What do you gain from my attempt, successful or otherwise?" The boat had reached the midpoint of the lake, far from either shore and any possibility of being overheard. Asher paused in his rowing, allowing the craft to drift gently on the still water. His silver-blue eyes met hers with an intensity that hadn't been there before, all traces of casual amusement gone from his expression. "Let us say that I have existed long enough to recognize patterns," he said carefully, "to see cycles that repeat endlessly, growing more hollow with each iteration. The dance of the princesses, the trials of champions, the slow feeding of the court. All of it has happened before, will happen again, unchanging, and ultimately meaningless." There was genuine emotion in his voice now, not the manufactured charm or calculated helpfulness he had displayed earlier, but something raw and real. It resonated with Isolde's own experience of isolation and difference. "You're tired of the pattern," she guessed. "You want something to change." "Change is rare in Twilight," he replied. "Immortality breeds stagnation. Those who live forever rarely see reason to alter their ways." He resumed rowing, his powerful strokes carrying them swiftly toward the shore from which they had departed. "But yes, I find myself interested in the possibility of disruption. And you, cursed one, carry disruption in your very being." It wasn't a complete answer, Isolde knew. Asher held secrets he wasn't ready to share, motivations he kept hidden. But it was honest as far as it went, and that would have to be enough for now. As the boat touched the shore and she stepped onto solid ground once more, she felt the first stirrings of an unexpected emotion: hope. Not hope that she would succeed, the odds remained overwhelmingly against her, but hope that perhaps, in this strange threshold place where rules differed and reality bent, her curse might prove an advantage rather than merely a burden. For the first time in 3 years, she considered the possibility that being caught between forms might grant her insights others lacked, perspectives unique to her particular suffering. Asher led her back up the crystal staircase toward the door through which she had entered hours before. The princesses and their partners were nowhere to be seen, either still dancing in the pavilion or perhaps returned to the mortal realm ahead of them. As they approached the small wooden door that would lead back to the spiral staircase, he paused, turning to face her. "3 pieces of advice, freely given," he said, holding up 3 fingers in unconscious mimicry of the Fae King earlier. "First, trust nothing you see in Twilight, especially that which seems most true. Second, remember that names have power here. Guard yours carefully and use others with precision. Third," his expression grew solemn, "do not mistake aesthetic beauty for moral good, nor physical monstrosity for evil. In Twilight, such correlations are meaningless at best, deliberately misleading at worst." The last piece of advice struck her as particularly significant, given her own transformed appearance. Before she could thank him, he reached out, almost but not quite touching her face, fingers hovering near the fur that covered her cheek. "Until tomorrow night, champion," he said softly. "Rest well. You will need all your strength for what lies ahead." Then he was gone, vanishing between one breath and the next, leaving Isolde alone at the threshold between Twilight and the mortal world. She pushed open the wooden door, feeling the chill air of the spiral staircase against her face, and began the long climb back to reality. As she ascended, step by careful step, the magical atmosphere of twilight gradually faded, replaced by the more mundane sensations of stone and darkness. The silver-leaf tea's effects were wearing off as well, her enhanced perceptions returning to their normal cursed state. By the time she reached the tapestry entrance to the princess's chambers, dawn was breaking outside the castle windows, pale light filtering through colored glass to paint patterns on the stone floors. The princesses had returned before her. All 6 lay in their beds, appearing to sleep peacefully, though Isolde now knew their exhaustion was far from natural. The guard outside her door still slumbered, affected by whatever draft the princesses had given him. She slipped past him into her own small chamber and sat heavily on the narrow cot, mind racing with all she had learned. The Fey court, the nightly dancing, the bargains struck and broken, the life force slowly drained, the trials that awaited her. So many pieces to consider, so little time to prepare. And underlying it all, the strange connection between the Brunswick witches and the Twilight Realm, a connection that had resulted in her own cursed state. As the sun rose fully over Ravenhurst, painting the city in gold and promise, Isolde finally allowed exhaustion to claim her. She would need her wits and strength for what lay ahead. Not just the Fey trials, but the more immediate challenge of explaining to King Thorn what she had discovered without revealing how deeply she had already committed herself to a dangerous path. Her last conscious thought before sleep claimed her was of Asher's face as he had given his parting advice, the strange intensity in those silver blue eyes that shifted like the twilight lake itself. There had been something there beyond mere interest in disruption, something personal and painful that she couldn't quite identify. Something that suggested his stake in her success might be far greater than he had admitted. Isolde woke to the sound of a key turning in the lock. Sunlight streamed through her chamber window, indicating she had slept well into the day. She rose quickly, smoothing her rumpled clothing and pulling her hood forward just as the door swung open to reveal a palace servant carrying a tray of food. "His Majesty requests your presence in the war room once you've broken your fast," the woman said, setting the tray on the small side table. She kept her eyes carefully averted from Isolde's face, but showed none of the terror common among villagers. Palace servants, it seemed, were made of sterner stuff. "What time is it?" Isolde asked, her voice rough from sleep. "Just past midday, my lady," the servant replied, already backing toward the door. "The guard will escort you when you're ready." When the door closed again, Isolde examined the tray. Fresh bread, cheese, cold meats, and a pot of herbal tea, simple fare, but of excellent quality. After 3 years of subsisting on whatever she could forage or trade for, such abundance seemed almost decadent. She ate quickly, mind working as she planned what to tell King Thorn. The full truth seemed unwise. The king might forbid her from returning to the Twilight Court if he knew she had already committed to the Fey trials. Yet outright deception was equally dangerous. If he discovered she had withheld crucial information, his already tenuous trust would evaporate. A careful middle path was needed. After finishing her meal, Isolde splashed water on her face from the basin, straightened her clothing as best she could, and signaled her readiness to the guard outside. He led her through a labyrinth of corridors and staircases, deeper into the fortress than she had been before. The passages grew older as they descended, the stone walls rougher, bearing the marks of ancient construction techniques long since refined. The war room, when they reached it, was a circular chamber carved directly into the bedrock beneath the castle. Maps covered the walls, detailed renderings of Ravenhurst and surrounding territories, with markers indicating military strongholds, trade routes, and what appeared to be known shapeshifter pack territories. A massive round table of polished ironwood dominated the center, its surface worn smooth by centuries of use. King Thorn stood examining one of the maps, his back to the door. He wore no crown, dressed instead in the practical leathers of a warrior rather than royal finery. 2 of his advisors, an elderly man with scholar's hands and a middle-aged woman with the ramrod posture of a veteran commander, stood nearby, engaged in low conversation. All 3 turned as Isolde entered. the king's storm-gray eyes fixed on her with immediate intensity. "You look remarkably unscathed for one who spent the night unraveling mysteries that have claimed 17 lives," he observed. "Tell me what you've discovered." Isolde moved to the table, maintaining a respectful distance from the king and his advisors. "Your sisters are being taken to another realm each night," she began. "A place that exists parallel to our own, accessed through a secret passage in their chambers. There, they are compelled to dance until dawn, their life force slowly drained to feed the inhabitants of that realm." The elderly advisor inhaled sharply. "The Fae," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "The Twilight Court." King Thorn's expression darkened. "Old legends, children's tales." "Very real, Your Majesty," Isolde countered firmly. "I followed your sisters through the passage last night. I witnessed their compelled dance. I saw their life force being harvested." The king's hands curled into fists at his sides. "And you returned safely? How? The others who attempted this never came back." "I was aided by a resident of that realm," Isolde admitted carefully. "Someone who seems to have his own reasons for wanting the situation resolved." "A Fae?" The female advisor's voice was sharp with suspicion. "They never help mortals without extracting a terrible price." "Perhaps," Isolde acknowledged, "but his assistance allowed me to learn the cause of your sister's affliction and potential paths to resolving it." King Thorn studied her face, seeming to look past the cursed features to the determination beneath. "Explain." Isolde took a deep breath and laid out what she had learned. Princess Elowen's bargain with the Fae King, her subsequent refusal to honor it, and the price now being paid by all 6 princesses collectively. She explained the 3 possibilities for resolution: allowing the debt to be paid through continued draining, having Elowen fulfill her original promise, or having a champion undergo 3 trials. What she did not reveal was her own commitment to be that champion, or the fact that the first trial would begin that very night. Instead, she presented it as one of several options still under consideration. When she finished, silence hung heavy in the ancient chamber. The scholarly advisor had grown increasingly pale during her explanation, while the female commander's expression had hardened to granite. "Elowen," King Thorn finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. "My own sister bargained with my mind as if it were hers to trade." "She sought to save you, Your Majesty," the elderly advisor offered hesitantly. "We all feared for your stability a year ago. The kingdom stood at the brink of civil war as your episodes grew more frequent." "And none thought to tell me the truth of my recovery?" The king's voice rose, echoing from the stone walls. "I attributed it to the herbal remedies from the royal physician, to rest and meditation. All the while my sister had struck a deal with creatures of legend, then refused to honor her part." "What would you have done in her place, sire?" the female commander asked bluntly. "Would you have allowed your sister to become consort to the Fae King for a season?" The question seemed to catch Thorn off guard. His anger deflated slightly, replaced by confusion and pain. I would never have permitted." "Precisely," the commander continued. "She knew you would forbid it, but she also knew you would never recover without intervention beyond mortal medicine. So she made the only choice she felt she could, to save you first and deal with the consequences later. A choice that now condemns all 6 of them to slow destruction," the king replied bitterly. "Where is Elowen now?" "Resting with the others, sire," the elderly advisor replied. "They are always weakest after returning from their night's ordeal." Thorn turned back to Isolde. "You said there are 3 options. The first, allowing this continued drain, is unacceptable. They grow weaker each day. According to the royal physician, they cannot survive more than another month of this deterioration." He began pacing the circumference of the table, energy barely contained. "The second, having Elowen fulfill her original bargain, would save 5 sisters at the cost of 1. A trading of hostages, essentially, also unacceptable." "Which leaves the third option," Isolde said quietly. "The trials of a champion." The king stopped pacing to stare at her. You intend to offer yourself as this champion?" It wasn't a question. Isolde inclined her head in acknowledgement, seeing little point in further deception now that he had intuited her intention. "Why?" he demanded. "You have no connection to my family, no stake in this kingdom. You were brought here as a prisoner, accused of crimes you claim you didn't commit. What possible reason could you have for risking yourself for my sisters?" Isolde considered her answer carefully. The true complexity of her motivations was difficult to articulate even to herself. After a moment, she settled for simple honesty. 3 years I've lived as something neither human nor wolf, rejected by both. If I return to that existence, it is merely a slower death than your executioner would provide. Here at least my curse might prove useful. I have nothing to lose, Your Majesty, and if I succeed, your sisters have everything to gain. The female commander made a sound of grudging approval. "Practical. I respect that." "There's more," the scholarly advisor interjected, studying Isolde with newfound interest. "The curse you bear, its appearance is distinctive. Brunswick work, if I'm not mistaken." Isolde stiffened. "You're familiar with such magic?" "I've studied many forms of enchantment in service to the crown," the old man replied. "The Brunswick family's particular approach to shapeshifter curses is well documented, if rare. They call it lycanthropic dysphoria, trapping the victim between human and wolf forms as punishment for perceived transgressions against their bloodline." "What relevance has this?" King Thorn demanded impatiently. "Potentially great relevance, sire," the advisor responded. "The Brunswick witches have maintained connections with the Fae for generations. Some texts suggest their most powerful curses draw directly on twilight magic. If that's the case, our friend here carries a piece of that realm with her already." He turned back to Isolde. "Which might explain why you were able to return when others did not. The curse marks you as adjacent to their world, in a sense." The insight aligned with what Isolde had learned from Asher and the copper-haired Fae. Her curse, rather than merely a burden, might actually grant her advantages in the trials to come, a thought both hopeful and ironic. King Thorn resumed his pacing, clearly wrestling with difficult calculations. "If you undertake these trials and fail, what happens?" "I join the previous champions as an ornament in the Fae King's garden," Isolde replied calmly, "transformed into something no longer human or wolf, but permanently fixed in a decorative form." "And if you succeed?" "Your sisters return free of their compulsion, their life force no longer being drained. The debt is considered paid in full." The king stopped directly across the table from her, hands braced on the ancient wood. "You understand that I cannot order you to do this. I offered you freedom in exchange for solving the mystery, not sacrificing yourself to Fae magic." "I understand, Your Majesty." "Yet you would do it anyway." "I would." Something shifted in the king's expression, a softening around the eyes, a subtle lessening of the hard line of his mouth. "Then I am in your debt before you even begin. What resources can I provide to aid your efforts? Weapons, ancient texts, magic of our own?" The question caught Isolde off guard. She had expected resistance, not support. Knowledge would be most useful, I think. Anything your libraries contain regarding the Fae and their ways, particularly records of past dealings between your family and the Twilight Court." "The Royal Archives contain several volumes on Fae interactions," the scholarly advisor offered, "including, if memory serves, a detailed account of an encounter during your great-grandfather's reign, sire." "Grant her full access," Thorn ordered. "Anything she requests, provide immediately." He turned back to Isolde. "When do these trials begin?" "Tonight," she admitted. "At moonrise. I must return through the secret passage in your sister's chambers." The king nodded once, decision made. "Then you have until moonrise to prepare. Lord Baelor will escort you to the archives and remain at your disposal. Commander Resven will ensure you have whatever else you require." The elderly advisor, Lord Baelor, apparently, bowed slightly to Isolde. "It would be my honor to assist, my lady." "I am no lady," Isolde corrected gently. "Just a cursed woman trying to be useful." "Nevertheless," the commander, Resven, interjected, You act with the courage and purpose of nobility, regardless of birth or appearance. I shall arrange for proper attire and equipment suitable for your task." King Thorn straightened to his full, imposing height. "We will speak again before you depart. For now, make whatever preparations you deem necessary, and know that regardless of the outcome, Ravenhurst acknowledges your courage." With those surprisingly gracious words, he strode from the chamber, leaving Isolde with the two advisors. Once the king had gone, Lord Baelor approached her with undisguised curiosity. "Fascinating," he murmured, peering at her transformed features. "I've never observed a Brunswick curse in person before. The partial manifestation of lupine characteristics combined with retention of human consciousness represents a remarkable magical achievement, however cruel the intent." "Baelor," Commander Resven said sharply. "She is a person, not a specimen for study." The old scholar flushed. "Of course, my deepest apologies. Academic curiosity often overrides my manners. Please forgive me." "There's nothing to forgive," Isolde assured him. "I've been treated as far worse than a curiosity these past years." "Even so, we shall treat you with the respect your courage deserves," Resven declared firmly. She was a striking woman, perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and the weathered complexion of one who had spent decades in field command. "Now, shall we proceed to the archives? Moonrise awaits for no one, and you have much to learn before then." The Royal Archives occupied the entirety of the fortress's western tower, 12 circular floors of accumulated knowledge spanning centuries. Each level specialized in different subjects: military history, diplomatic relations, scientific observation, magical theory, and more. The Fae-related texts were housed on the 9th floor, in a section dedicated to non-human races and their interactions with the kingdom. Lord Baelor led Isolde directly to the relevant shelves, pulling volumes with practiced efficiency. "These should provide general background on Fae customs and laws," he said, placing a stack of leather-bound books on a reading table. "And these," he added, selecting several more ornate volumes, "detail specific encounters between the Ironwood Line and the Twilight Court over the past 4 centuries." Isolde opened the topmost book, a treatise entitled "The Nature and Customs of the Fae Realms" by a scholar named Meriwether Voss. The text was dense but precise, confirming much of what she had observed during her night in the Twilight Court: the Fae's inability to lie directly, their obsession with bargains and balanced exchanges, their fundamentally different perception of morality and ethics. "What does this mean?" she asked, pointing to a passage about threshold beings that seemed potentially relevant to her cursed state. Baelor adjusted his spectacles and peered at the text. "Ah, yes, threshold beings, those who exist between defined states, neither fully one thing nor another. The Fae themselves are considered ultimate threshold beings, existing between our world and others, between mortality and immortality. They're said to recognize and sometimes favor others who share this liminal quality." "Like someone under a curse that traps them between forms," Isolde suggested. "Precisely." Baelor looked impressed by her quick understanding. "Your curse may indeed give you certain advantages when dealing with the Fae. They respect boundaries and those who cross them, whether voluntarily or not." "And what of the trials themselves?" she asked, turning pages in search of relevant information. "Are there records of what previous champions faced?" Baelor's expression grew somber. "Few who faced the trials ever returned to document them, but there are some accounts." He selected a slimmer volume bound in faded blue leather. This journal belonged to Lord Cassius Ironwood, younger brother to King Eldon, who ruled some 160 years ago. He undertook trials to free his betrothed from a Fae enchantment. "Did he succeed?" Isolde asked, already suspecting the answer. "No," Baelor said quietly, "but he survived long enough to document his first 2 trials before vanishing during the third. His journal was found on the bank of the lake in the cavern you described, apparently left deliberately for others to find." Isolde accepted the journal with careful hands. The opportunity to learn from a previous champion's experience, even an ultimately unsuccessful one, might prove invaluable. She opened it to find handwriting that was precise but increasingly unsteady as the account progressed, suggesting the writer's deteriorating condition. As she began to read, Commander Resven returned with a bundle of clothing and a small pack. "These should serve your needs better than what you're currently wearing," she explained, laying the items on a chair. "Practical garments that allow freedom of movement, sturdy boots, a cloak with a deeper hood for your comfort, and a pack containing basic supplies, a water skin, dried provisions, flint and steel, a small knife." Isolde looked up from the journal, genuinely touched by the consideration. "Thank you, Commander. This is more help than I expected." Resven waved away her gratitude. "You undertake a dangerous mission on behalf of the Crown. Proper equipment is the least we can provide. I would offer weapons as well, but from what I understand of Fey encounters, steel blades avail little against their magic." "True enough," Isolde agreed, "though I wouldn't refuse a silver dagger if one is available. Silver has properties that sometimes affect magical beings." Resven nodded thoughtfully. "I'll see what can be arranged. The Royal Armory may have something suitable." For the next several hours, Isolde immersed herself in study, absorbing as much information as possible about the Fae and their customs. Lord Cassius's journal proved particularly valuable, describing in detail the first 2 trials he had faced, a challenge of perception involving poisoned wine, and a maze that changed according to the emotional state of the person navigating it. The descriptions matched what Asher had told her about the trials testing intellect, compassion, and will. Most intriguing were Cassius's observations about his Fae guide, a woman named Astriel who, like Asher, had appeared to offer help without obvious motive. His journal suggested growing trust in her, despite warnings from others about Fae deceptions. The final entry, written the night before his disappearance, mentioned Astriel's cryptic warning about the 3rd trial. "What you most desire and what you most fear often wear the same face in twilight." As the hours passed, servants brought food and drink, which Isolde barely touched, too absorbed in her research. Commander Resven returned with a silver dagger in an ornate sheath, its handle wrapped in leather for comfortable grip. "From the king's personal collection," she explained, "enchanted by royal mages 3 generations ago to maintain its edge regardless of use." Isolde accepted the weapon with appropriate reverence. "Please convey my gratitude to His Majesty." "You may do so yourself," Resven replied. "He wishes to speak with you before you depart. Also, Princess Lyra has awakened and asked to see you." The mention of the young princess who had given her the silver-leaf tea caught Isolde's attention. "She's conscious? I thought they remained in exhausted sleep throughout the day." "The youngest has always shown more resilience than her sisters," Resven explained, "though even she grows weaker with each passing night." Isolde closed the books and journals, having absorbed as much as time permitted. "I should change first," she said, gesturing to the clothing Resven had provided. "Is there somewhere?" "A side chamber has been prepared for your use," the commander said, leading her to a small room adjacent to the archives. "I'll wait to escort you to Princess Lyra once you're ready." The clothing proved to be of excellent quality, dark trousers and tunic of soft but sturdy material, a leather vest with multiple small pockets, boots that fit surprisingly well, and a hooded cloak of deep blue fabric that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The overall effect, when Isolde examined herself in a small mirror provided, was to minimize her cursed appearance while maximizing practicality. Even the hood was designed to shadow her features without restricting her vision. When she emerged, Resven nodded approval. "Much better. The right tools and equipment often make the difference between success and failure." "In battle, perhaps," Isolde said. "I suspect the Fae trials will test qualities beyond physical readiness." "All challenges have a physical component," the commander replied pragmatically. "Even ones of intellect or will require a body strong enough to endure while the mind works. Now, shall we visit the princess?" Princess Lyra had been moved to a small solarium near the eastern gardens, where afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows. Despite this cheerful setting, she looked even more fragile than she had the previous night, her skin now so translucent that the blue veins beneath were clearly visible even from a distance. She reclined on a chaise, wrapped in blankets despite the warmth of the day, a book open but unread in her lap. Her storm-gray eyes brightened slightly when Isolde entered. "You returned," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't certain you would." "As you see, Princess." Isolde approached and seated herself on a stool near the chaise, pulling back her hood just enough for Lyra to see her face clearly. "Your tea proved helpful. Thank you." Lyra's smile was a ghost of what it might once have been. "I'm glad. Did you see where we go each night?" "I did. I followed you through the secret passage behind the tapestry, across the silver lake to the crystal pavilion. I saw the Twilight Court and its king." The princess closed her eyes briefly, whether in relief or pain Isolde couldn't tell. "Then you know about Elowen's bargain, about what happens to us there." "I know," Isolde confirmed gently. "She didn't tell us," Lyra said, a hint of bitterness entering her weak voice. "Elowen, she never said what she'd done until the first night we were all compelled to dance. We just woke in the night and found ourselves walking through that passage, unable to stop or speak or resist in any way." Isolde leaned forward. "What do you experience during these nights, Princess? Are you aware while it happens?" "Glimpses only," Lyra replied. "Moments of clarity amidst what seems like a beautiful dream of dancing. I'm more resistant than my sisters for some reason. I can sometimes fight through the compulsion briefly, enough to remember fragments of reality." "That's why you were able to bring me the tea," Isolde realized. "You retain more agency than the others." Lyra nodded faintly. "Not much, and less each night. Soon I'll be like them, empty vessels being steadily drained of life." Her gaze sharpened suddenly. "You're going back tonight, aren't you? You're going to attempt the trials." There seemed little point in denying it. "Yes." "Why?" The princess's question echoed her brother's from earlier. "You owe us nothing. Our family's mistake shouldn't become your burden." Isolde considered how to explain what she herself only partly understood, this compulsion to act, to risk herself for strangers, when logic would dictate self-preservation. Finally, she settled on a truth she hadn't fully articulated, even to herself. "For 3 years, I've been defined by what was done to me," she said slowly, "by a curse that made others see me as a monster, that stripped away my identity and replaced it with fear and revulsion. Perhaps I wish to be defined, at least once, by what I choose to do rather than by what was done to me." Lyra studied her with those 2 old eyes in a too young face. "That," she said quietly, "I understand completely." The princess reached beneath her blankets and withdrew a small object that glinted in the sunlight, a silver brooch shaped like an ironwood leaf. "Take this. It has been in our family for generations, passed from mother to daughter, sister to sister. It's said to preserve a piece of the wearer's essence, preventing it from being taken against their will." Isolde hesitated. "Princess, I cannot accept such an heirloom." "Please," Lyra interrupted. "If not for yourself, then for us. Every advantage you gain improves the chance of our freedom." Her thin fingers closed around the brooch with surprising strength. "I would give far more valuable things than this to end our suffering." Put that way, refusal seemed almost selfish. Isolde accepted the brooch, pinning it carefully to the inside of her vest, where it would remain hidden. "I will return it when this is finished," she promised. "When, not if," Lyra noted with a hint of her earlier spirit. "I like your confidence." "Hope, not confidence," Isolde corrected gently. "But sometimes hope is enough to begin." They spoke for a while longer, Lyra sharing what little she could remember of the Twilight Court from her moments of clarity during the compelled dancing. Though fragmentary, her observations confirmed much of what Isolde had already learned and added a few new insights about the physical layout of the pavilion and the hierarchies among the Fae courtiers. Eventually, a palace servant entered to announce that King Thorn awaited Isolde in his private study. Lyra gripped Isolde's hand briefly before she rose to leave. "Whatever happens," the princess whispered. "Know that you have done more than anyone else who tried to help us. You saw the truth. You returned. You chose to act. These things alone make you extraordinary." Touched by the young woman's words, Isolde squeezed her hand gently before replacing her hood and following the servant to her final meeting before nightfall. The king's study occupied a corner tower with windows facing east and south, allowing maximum light throughout the day. Unlike the formal grandeur of the throne room or the austere functionality of the war chamber, this space reflected a more personal side of the monarch. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled not with ornate royal volumes, but well-used texts on history, strategy, and governance. Maps were pinned haphazardly across one wall, marked with notations in a bold hand. A massive desk occupied the center, its surface covered with documents, a half-eaten meal pushed carelessly aside. King Thorn stood at the eastern window, watching the sun's descent toward the horizon. He turned as Isolde entered, dismissing the servant with a nod. "You've prepared as thoroughly as time allows?" he asked without preamble. "As thoroughly as possible, Your Majesty," she confirmed. He gestured to a chair across from his own at the desk. Once they were both seated, he studied her with that same intense gaze she had noted in the war room. "Lord Baelor tells me you absorbed in hours what takes most scholars weeks to comprehend. He's quite impressed." "Necessity focuses the mind remarkably well," Isolde replied. A brief smile flickered across the king's stern features. "Indeed it does." He reached into a drawer and withdrew a small wooden box, placing it on the desk between them. "I've had this since childhood, though I never understood its significance until today." He opened the box to reveal a simple iron key, unadorned but ancient in appearance. "My father gave this to me on his deathbed, saying only that it would open the way home should I ever find myself lost between realms. I thought it merely the ramblings of a dying man, but now I wonder if he knew more than he revealed about our family's connections to the Twilight Court." Thorn pushed the box toward her. "Take it. Perhaps it will serve some purpose in your trials." Isolde accepted the gift, tucking the key securely into one of her vest pockets. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "There is one more matter we must discuss," the king continued, his expression grave. "My sister Eowyn. I've spoken with her at length since our meeting this morning." Isolde waited, sensing there was more to come. "She confesses everything, the bargain, her refusal to honor it, the consequences now visited upon all 6 of them. She weeps with remorse, yet still insists she couldn't bear to become the Fae King's consort, even temporarily." "Did she explain why?" Isolde asked carefully, beyond the obvious reluctance anyone might feel at such a prospect. Thorn's jaw tightened. "She claims the Fae King is not what he appears to be, that during their initial meetings, before the bargain was struck, she sensed something wrong about him, something hidden beneath the perfect exterior that terrified her beyond reason." This was new information, potentially significant. Did she elaborate on this feeling? Only that it came to her in fragments, in moments when the king's attention was elsewhere. She described it as glimpsing a shadow where no shadow should be, hearing a discord in perfect music, nothing concrete, nothing she could define precisely. He sighed heavily. "I would dismiss it as rationalization for breaking her word, but Eowyn has always possessed unusual sensitivity to such things. Our mother called it the veil sight, an ability to perceive what lies beneath appearances." "This could be valuable information," Isolde said thoughtfully. "If the Fae King is concealing something, understanding what might give me an advantage in the trials." "Or it might simply be my sister's fear finding form," Thorn countered. "I present it to you as she presented it to me, neither endorsing nor dismissing her claims." "I appreciate your candor, Your Majesty." The king rose, indicating their meeting was nearing its conclusion. "Moonrise approaches. The guard will escort you to my sister's chambers when you're ready. They have been informed of your return and the purpose of your visit." Isolde stood as well, suddenly acutely aware that this might be the last conversation she would ever have in the mortal realm. The thought brought an unexpected calm rather than fear. She had made her choice. Now she would see it through to whatever end awaited. "If I do not return," she said quietly, "I ask only that you remember me as I was in these chambers. a woman who chose her path freely, not the monster my curse made me appear." King Thorn regarded her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret, something between respect and regret. "I will remember," he promised, "and if you succeed, Isolde, know that you will find more than mere freedom awaiting your return. My kingdom rewards courage and honor, regardless of the form in which they appear." The formal words carried the weight of royal pledge, unexpected and moving. Isolde bowed deeply, the gesture expressing what words could not. As she straightened, the last rays of sunlight vanished from the window. Night had fallen over Ravenhurst. Somewhere in the palace, a clock began to toll the hour. It was time. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows of the princess's chambers, painting silver pathways across the marble floor. Isolde stood before the ancient tapestry that concealed the secret passage, absorbing the hushed atmosphere of anticipation that filled the room. Behind her, King Thorn and his advisors waited in respectful silence. The 6 princesses lay in their beds, appearing to sleep peacefully, though Isolde now knew better. Only Princess Lyra showed signs of consciousness, her eyes half open, watching Isolde with a mixture of hope and resignation. The youngest princess had insisted on remaining awake to witness Isolde's departure, despite the exhaustion that weighed on her like a physical burden. "It is time," King Thorn said quietly, breaking the silence. "The moon has reached its zenith." Isolde nodded, adjusting the silver dagger at her belt, and ensuring the ironwood leaf brooch and iron key were secure in her inner pockets. She had changed into the clothing provided by Commander Resven, practical dark garments that would allow her to move freely during whatever challenges awaited. The deep blue cloak settled around her shoulders like a comforting weight, its hood pulled forward to shadow her cursed features. "Remember," Lord Baelor said, his scholarly voice tight with concern, "the Fae cannot lie directly, but their truths are layered with misdirection. Question everything, assume nothing." "And trust your instincts," Commander Resven added. "They've kept you alive this long. Even in a realm of magic, a clear head and sharp senses remain valuable weapons." Isolde appreciated their concern, but found herself strangely calm. The path ahead was dangerous, perhaps fatal, yet there was clarity and commitment that banished lesser fears. She had made her choice. Now she would see it through. "Your Majesty," she said, turning to the king, "should I not return by dawn, tell the village of Thorn Hollow that Red Eyes was innocent of the crimes alleged against her. Let them know I chose a better end than their hatred would have granted me." King Thorn inclined his head, the gesture carrying the weight of royal promise. "It will be done, though I expect to deliver that message to you personally upon your successful return." Isolde smiled faintly at his confidence, then turned back to the tapestry. She pressed her hand against the hidden mechanism in the stone wall, and with a soft, grinding sound, the passage opened before her. Cool air flowed from the darkness beyond, carrying that strange, sweet scent she had noticed the night before, like summer flowers mixed with winter frost, a combination that shouldn't exist in nature. Without looking back, she stepped into the passage and began her descent. The grinding of stone behind her confirmed that the door had closed, sealing her path. There was only forward now, down the spiraling staircase into the realm of twilight. Her cursed eyes adjusted quickly to the darkness, allowing her to navigate the ancient steps without faltering. The descent seemed longer than she remembered from the previous night, the air growing increasingly charged with strange energy that prickled against her skin. By the time she reached the small wooden door at the bottom, she could feel magic humming in the air around her, a resonance that seemed to respond to her own cursed state. She pushed the door open and stepped once more into the vast underground cavern with its glowing flora and crystalline trees. The silvery light that had no apparent source illuminated the scene exactly as she remembered. The broad avenue stretching toward the still lake, the terraced gardens rising on the far shore, and atop them, the crystal pavilion gleaming against the artificial night sky of the cavern ceiling. But unlike the previous evening, the scene was eerily empty. No princesses walked the path, no boatmen waited at the shore. The music that had filled the air was silent now, leaving only the soft rustling of metallic leaves and the distant sound of flowing water. "You came," Asher's voice came from directly behind her, causing her to spin around in surprise. He stood leaning against the trunk of a silver tree, arms crossed casually over his chest, watching her with those shifting silver-blue eyes. He wore different clothing than the previous night, a more formal attire of midnight blue and silver that emphasized his otherworldly beauty. "I said I would," Isolde replied, studying him carefully. After her conversations with King Thorn and her research in the archives, she was even more aware of the need for caution. Whatever Asher's reasons for helping her, they served his own interests first. "Many mortals make promises to the Fae with no intention of keeping them," he observed, your Princess Elowen being a prime example. "I'm not Elowen," Isolde said simply. Something flickered across Asher's perfect features, approval perhaps, or amusement. "No, you are certainly not." He pushed away from the tree and approached her with that fluid grace that marked him as inhuman. "Your first trial awaits in the Hall of Reflections. I can guide you there, if you wish." Isolde considered refusing, suspicious of his too ready assistance, but practicality won out. "Thank you," she said cautiously. "I would appreciate your guidance." Asher gestured toward a path that branched away from the main avenue, leading into a grove of trees whose trunks seemed formed of twisted copper. "This way, champion. Mind your step. The path has a tendency to shift for the unwary." As they walked, Isolde noticed that the landscape around them did indeed seem subtly fluid, landmarks changing position when viewed from different angles. Without Asher's guidance, she suspected she would quickly become hopelessly lost among the metallic trees and phosphorescent undergrowth. "The Hall of Reflections," she said as they walked. "What can you tell me about it?" "It's a place of truth and illusion intertwined," Asher replied, his tone carefully neutral. "A chamber where what you see depends entirely on what you believe about yourself and others. Some find it enlightening. Most find it terrifying." "And what trial awaits me there?" Asher's smile was enigmatic. "That would be telling, wouldn't it? Suffice to say it tests intellect, the ability to discern reality from deception, truth from comfortable falsehood." They walked in silence for a time, the path winding deeper into the copper forest. Isolde found herself studying Asher when she thought he wasn't looking, trying to reconcile his apparent helpfulness with the warnings she had received about Fae deception. There was something different about him compared to the other Fae she had observed, a quality she couldn't quite define, but that set him apart. "You're staring," he observed without looking at her. "Do you find my appearance as strange as I find yours?" The question caught her off guard. "Strange? I would have thought you considered yourself beautiful by any standard." "Beauty and strangeness are not mutually exclusive," Asher pointed out. "One can be both exquisite and utterly alien, as most of my kind are to mortal eyes, just as you are both monstrous and magnificent to Fae perception." "Monstrous and magnificent," Isolde repeated, testing the words. "No one has ever described me that way before." "Humans lack imagination," Asher said dismissively. "They see only through the narrow lens of their brief experiences. We Fae have existed for millennia, witnessing countless forms of beauty and horror. Your curse places you in the fascinating territory between defined states, neither fully human nor fully wolf, but something unique that spans both worlds without belonging to either." There was something almost wistful in his tone, a quality that made Isolde wonder if he spoke not just of her situation, but of his own as well. Before she could pursue that thought, the path opened suddenly into a circular clearing. At its center stood a structure unlike any Isolde had seen before, a perfect dome formed of what appeared to be liquid glass, its surface constantly rippling like disturbed water, yet maintaining its architectural shape. "The Hall of Reflections," Asher announced. "Your first trial awaits within." Isolde approached the strange building cautiously. As she drew nearer, she could see distorted images of herself reflected in its flowing surface, not just her current form, but fragments of who she had been before the curse, glimpses of potential futures both terrible and wonderful. The effect was disorienting, forcing her to focus on the simple glass door that provided the only apparent entrance. "You will enter alone," Asher said, stopping at the edge of the clearing. "I cannot accompany you into the trial itself." "Will you wait?" Isolde asked, surprising herself with the question. Asher's expression softened momentarily. "Yes," he said quietly. "I will be here when you emerge, if you emerge." With that ambiguous reassurance, Isolde approached the entrance to the Hall of Reflections. The glass door opened at her touch, releasing a breath of air that carried the scent of ancient books and fresh snow. She stepped through, and immediately the door sealed behind her, the material flowing seamlessly into the wall, as if no opening had ever existed. The interior of the dome was both larger and smaller than it had appeared from outside. An impossible space that seemed to expand infinitely in some directions while remaining intimately close in others. The walls, floor, and ceiling were formed of the same liquid glass as the exterior, but here the reflective quality was even more pronounced. Everywhere Isolde looked, she saw herself reflected, sometimes whole, sometimes fragmented, sometimes not herself at all, but other people who had shaped her life. In the center of the chamber stood a single table of polished obsidian. Upon it rested 3 identical crystal goblets, each filled with a liquid that caught and refracted the strange light of the hall. Beside the goblets lay a small card of parchment with flowing script that glittered like fresh ink. Isolde approached cautiously, reading the message as she drew near. "One goblet brings clarity, one brings illusion, one brings the void. Choose wisely, for truth and falsehood wear the same face in twilight. Look beyond what seems to your eyes that do not see. Drink and know the nature of reflection." The trial had begun. Isolde studied the 3 goblets carefully. They appeared identical in every detail. Same crystal structure, same level of liquid, same subtle gleam in the hall's ambient light. The liquid itself was clear as water, betraying no color, scent, or distinctive quality that might differentiate one choice from another. From her research in the archives, she knew this was a common form of Fey challenge, the impossible choice where all options appeared identical. Lord Cassius had faced something similar in his first trial, though according to his journal, his task had involved 5 goblets rather than 3. His approach had been to taste each minimally, testing for poison. He had survived, but described hallucinations and weakness that had hampered him in his second trial. Isolde had no intention of repeating his mistake. There had to be another way to determine the contents without tasting them. She circled the table slowly, observing how the light played through the crystal and liquid from different angles. Nothing distinctive emerged from this examination. Then she noticed something curious. Despite the countless reflections of herself visible in the walls of the hall, none of the goblets showed a reflection in any surface. It was as if they existed in the space without interacting with it, or perhaps they were themselves reflections of objects that existed elsewhere. "Look beyond what seems to your eyes that do not see," she murmured, recalling the parchment's clue. Her cursed eyes, though capable of seeing in darkness, might still be deceived by Fey illusion. What other senses might provide insight? She leaned close to each goblet in turn, inhaling deeply. The first gave off no scent whatsoever, an absence so complete it seemed unnatural. The second carried a faint aroma reminiscent of summer rain and fresh herbs. The third smelled of nothing initially, but as she concentrated, Isolde detected an underlying metallic tang like old blood. Touch might reveal more. She ran one finger along the rim of each goblet. The first felt warm despite its appearance of cool crystal. The second was cold to the touch, condensation forming where her skin made contact. The third seemed to absorb her body heat without changing its own temperature, creating an unsettling sensation of energy being drawn from her finger. Isolde stepped back, considering what she had learned. 3 goblets, each behaving differently when examined beyond visual inspection. The parchment mentioned clarity, illusion, and void, but which was which? She recalled another passage from Lord Baelor's books. "The Fae value truth above all else, yet their truth is seldom what mortals expect." To them, truth is not merely the absence of falsehood, but the perfect alignment of essence and appearance. Illusion is not deception, but the gap between perception and reality. The void is neither truth nor illusion, but the absence of both, a state of non-being that exists only in the spaces between defined concepts. With this framework in mind, Isolde reconsidered the goblets. The first gave off no scent but felt warm, a contradiction between senses that suggested misalignment between appearance and reality. Illusion, perhaps. The second offered consistent information across senses: visible liquid, scent of rain, cool to the touch as water should be. Clarity seemed most likely. The third existed in a state of negation, no reflection, a scent that emerged only through concentrated effort, a temperature that defied classification by drawing energy rather than exhibiting its own thermal properties. The void. If her reasoning was correct, the second goblet would bring clarity, the quality needed to progress through the trials. Yet doubt lingered. The Fae were masters of misdirection. What if the obvious answer was a trap? Isolde closed her eyes, focusing her thoughts. The key lay in the parchment's message. Look beyond what seems to your eyes that do not see. Her cursed eyes had been the first target of Evangeline's malice, transformed to mark her as monstrous to human perception. Yet in twilight, these same eyes were not a curse, but a potential advantage, allowing her to see in darkness, to perceive what others might miss. Eyes that do not see, she repeated softly. What if the message wasn't about physical sight at all, but about perspective? Her curse had changed not just how others saw her, but how she saw herself, as something broken, trapped between states. Yet Asher had described that same condition as fascinating and unique, spanning worlds rather than belonging to neither. Perhaps the trial wasn't about choosing the right goblet based on physical properties, but about recognizing the nature of reflection itself, how perception shaped reality in twilight. With sudden clarity, Isolde looked up from the goblets to the countless reflections of herself in the hall's walls. Among them, she now noticed, were 3 that remained constant while the others shifted and flowed. 3 reflections that corresponded to the 3 goblets, showing what would happen if she drank from each. In the first reflection, she saw herself transformed back to her human appearance, beautiful and whole, as she had been before Evangeline's curse. In the second, she remained as she was, cursed features unchanged, red eyes gleaming in the strange light. In the third, she faded into transparency, becoming a ghost of herself before disappearing entirely. The trap revealed itself in perfect clarity. The first goblet offered what she most desired: an end to her curse, restoration of her human form. But this was illusion, a false promise designed to prey on her deepest wish. The third offered oblivion, the void where she would cease to exist entirely. Only the second offered truth, the clarity to see and accept herself as she truly was, neither fully human nor fully wolf, but something unique that spanned both worlds. Isolde reached for the second goblet with steady hands. As her fingers closed around the crystal stem, the liquid within began to glow with soft blue light. She raised it to her lips and drank. The liquid tasted of nothing at first, then exploded into a cascade of sensations: cool mountain streams, summer thunderstorms, winter frost on glass, autumn leaves burning. Images flooded her mind, memories of her life before the curse, the years of isolation after, and glimpses of possible futures branching like rivers before her. Through it all ran a current of pure awareness, a clarity that stripped away illusion and self-deception, leaving only truth in its wake. When the flood of sensations subsided, Isolde found herself standing exactly where she had been, still holding the now empty goblet. But everything had changed. The walls of the Hall of Reflections now showed only one version of her, neither the human she had once been, nor the cursed creature she had become, but a synthesis of both. In this reflection, the wolf features that had marked her as monstrous to human eyes appeared instead as attributes of power and insight. Her red eyes gleamed not with malevolence, but with vision that transcended ordinary sight. As she watched, the reflective walls of the hall began to flow and reshape themselves, opening a new doorway opposite the one through which she had entered. Beyond it, she could see Asher waiting, his expression betraying genuine surprise as she emerged from the Hall of Reflections. "You chose correctly," he said, a note of respect in his voice. "Few do." "Few look beyond what their eyes believe they see," Isolde replied, feeling the lingering effects of the clarity goblet sharpening her perceptions. The Twilight Realm seemed somehow more substantial now, its details more precisely defined, its underlying currents of magic visible as patterns of light and energy flowing through the landscape. "What did you learn in there?" Asher asked as they began walking again, following a new path that led away from the copper forest toward what appeared to be gardens of crystal flowers. Isolde considered the question carefully. That reflection isn't about seeing oneself as others do, or even as one wishes to be seen. It's about perceiving the essence beneath appearance, the truth that exists independent of perspective. Asher nodded slowly. "A valuable insight, one that may serve you well in what comes next." "The second trial," Isolde said, "testing compassion, if I understand correctly." "Indeed, the maze of whispers awaits." Asher gestured toward an imposing structure that had appeared on the horizon, walls of living hedge that shifted and moved like something breathing, pathways visible through occasional gaps that opened and closed rhythmically. A place where the past speaks and emotions shape reality. As they approached the maze, Isolde could hear faint voices carried on the breeze, whispers too indistinct to understand but somehow familiar, as if fragments of conversations long forgotten had found their way into twilight. The sensation was unsettling, raising the hairs on the back of her neck. "What exactly is this compassion that will be tested?" she asked, studying the maze's undulating walls with growing apprehension. "Not the simple kindness mortals often mistake for true compassion," Asher replied. "The Fae understand compassion as something deeper, the ability to witness suffering without turning away, to experience another's pain without being consumed by it, to offer help without expectation of reward or gratitude." "That sounds more like wisdom than emotion," Isolde observed. Asher's smile was enigmatic. "In Twilight, they are often the same. Emotions without wisdom lead to chaos. Wisdom without emotion leads to cruelty. True compassion requires both, the heart to feel and the mind to understand." They had reached the entrance to the maze, a simple archway formed of intertwined branches that seemed to reach toward them like yearning hands. Beyond it, the path disappeared into mist and shadow, offering no hint of what lay within. "I cannot accompany you further," Asher said, stopping at the threshold. "The maze responds uniquely to each who enters. My presence would only distort your experience." Isolde nodded, accepting this limitation. "Will you wait, as you did before?" "I will find you when you emerge," he promised, careful with his wording in the way of the Fae. "But remember, the maze changes according to the emotions of those within it. Fear creates monsters, anger builds walls, despair digs pits. Only compassion opens paths." With that cryptic advice, he stepped back, leaving Isolde alone before the entrance. She took a deep breath, centered herself, and stepped through the archway into the maze of whispers. Immediately, the mist closed around her, obscuring her vision beyond a few feet in any direction. The whispering voices grew louder, more distinct, though still maddeningly difficult to understand completely. The hedge walls rose high on either side, their branches continuing to shift and move as if reaching for her. The ground beneath her feet was soft earth covered with pale blue moss that glowed faintly, providing just enough light to see by. Isolde began walking, following the only path available to her. The whispers grew increasingly coherent as she progressed, gradually resolving into recognizable voices from her past. Her mother teaching her the names of stars. "The heavens speak to those who know how to listen, Isolde. Remember this when I am gone." Her father, distant and formal after her mother's death. "You remind me too much of her. It pains me to look at you sometimes." Evangeline, sweet poison in her voice. Such a clever girl. No wonder you've caught Lord Ambrose's eye. A brilliant mind deserves recognition, doesn't it? The voices followed her as she navigated the twisting paths, growing stronger or fainter depending on which turns she took. Some pathways led toward voices of comfort and love, others toward memories of pain and rejection. Isolde found herself instinctively avoiding the painful ones, seeking the comfort of happier memories. Then she turned a corner and found herself face to face with an old woman seated on a stone bench in a small clearing. Her wrinkled face was deeply lined with age and weariness, her eyes clouded with cataracts, her hands gnarled with arthritis. She looked up as Isolde approached, squinting as if struggling to see. "Who comes?" the woman asked, her voice surprisingly strong despite her frail appearance. "Another champion seeking glory through my tears? Or merely another lost soul wandering where they don't belong?" Isolde recognized her immediately from Lord Cassius's journal descriptions, the woman in the maze, eternally trapped, whom the Fey King had bound to remain until she cried. According to Cassius, she was a powerful being in her own right, though constrained by the king's magic. "Neither," Isolde replied carefully. "I am Isolde, here to free the 6 princesses from their compelled dance." The old woman laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "Ah, yes. The dancing princesses. Such a pretty trap, isn't it? Far more elegant than mine." She gestured at the maze around them. "I've been here for centuries, bound by a king's command to remain until I shed tears. Once I was beautiful, powerful, free. Now I am this, a withered crone waiting for compassion that never comes." Isolde approached cautiously, taking a seat beside the woman on the bench. "You're the Phoenix," she said, recalling the details from Cassius's account, "bound here because you refused to bow to the Fey King." "I have been called Phoenix, yes," the woman acknowledged, "among other names, and yes, I refuse to acknowledge his supremacy over creatures of fire and air." She turned her clouded eyes toward Isolde. "You bear a curse, I see, caught between forms. How interesting that he chose you as champion." "He didn't choose me," Isolde corrected. "I volunteered." The Phoenix's expression shifted subtly. "Did you? How curious. Most champions are tricked or coerced in some fashion. The king prefers unwilling players in his games." This confirmed Isolde's suspicion that there was more to her selection than mere chance. "Why has no one succeeded in making you cry?" she asked, changing the subject. "Surely in centuries of attempts, someone must have moved you to tears." "Oh, many have tried," the Phoenix replied with bitter amusement. "They've told me tragic tales, shown me visions of suffering, threatened and cajoled and begged, but you cannot force tears from eyes that have seen millennia of pain. After a certain point, nothing surprises, nothing moves, nothing touches what remains of one's heart." Isolde considered this. The trial was supposed to test compassion, the ability to witness suffering without turning away, to understand pain without being consumed by it. But how could she demonstrate compassion to a being who had witnessed centuries of suffering and remained unmoved? Perhaps the approach itself was wrong. True compassion wasn't about forcing emotional responses, but about meeting others where they were, understanding their needs without imposing one's own expectations. "What do you want?" Isolde asked simply. "Not what the king demands or what would free you from this maze. What do you yourself truly desire?" The question seemed to startle the Phoenix. For a moment, her ancient eyes cleared, revealing depths of fiery intelligence. "What do I want? No one has asked me that in a very long time." She was silent for several heartbeats. "I want to fly again," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "To feel the wind beneath my wings, to soar above the world and see it whole beneath me. To be not this decrepit form, but the creature of flame and freedom I once was." The longing in her voice resonated with Isolde's own experience of transformation and loss. She understood suddenly that the Phoenix's imprisonment wasn't just physical, but existential. a magnificent being of power and movement confined not only to the maze, but to a form that denied her essential nature. "I understand," Isolde said quietly. "To be trapped in a form that denies who you truly are, to look in mirrors and see a stranger, to know that others perceive only your outer shell and never the essence within." The phoenix's gaze sharpened. "Yes," she said, "exactly that." "My curse traps me between human and wolf," Isolde continued. "Neither fully one nor the other. I've spent 3 years living as something people fear and revile, watching them cross the street to avoid me, hearing mothers warn their children about red eyes who will eat them if they misbehave." She pulled back her hood, revealing her transformed features fully. "But recently I've begun to wonder if the true curse isn't the transformation itself, but how I've allowed it to define me, how I've accepted others' perception as reality." The phoenix studied her with growing interest. "And have you found an answer to this wondering?" Isolde thought of the clarity goblet, of the single unified reflection it had revealed. "I'm beginning to," she admitted. "To see that being caught between forms isn't necessarily a weakness, that existing at the threshold between states grants perspectives unavailable to those firmly rooted in a single identity." A smile creased the phoenix's ancient face. "Now that," she said with genuine warmth, "is wisdom rarely found in one so young." She reached out one gnarled hand, hesitating before touching Isolde's cheek where the coarse fur grew. "May I?" Isolde nodded, allowing the contact. The phoenix's fingers were gentle as they traced the patterns of her curse, lingering on the red eyes that had given her forest name. "Fascinating," the old woman murmured. "Brunswick work, but with something else layered beneath it, something older." Her clouded eyes narrowed in concentration. "Tell me, child, have you ever considered that your curse might not be what you think it is?" The question caught Isolde off guard. "What do you mean?" "Curses, like stories, have layers," the phoenix explained. "Surface meanings that distract from deeper truths. The Brunswicks are skilled in shapeshifter magic, yes, but this," she gestured at Isolde's features, "this has elements of feycraft woven through it, almost as if—" She trailed off, lost in thought. Then, abruptly, she began to laugh, not the bitter sound from earlier, but genuine mirth that transformed her withered features. The laughter continued until tears began to stream down her wrinkled cheeks. "Oh, the irony!" she gasped between peals of laughter. "He doesn't even know what he's done, after all these centuries, to make such a fundamental mistake." The tears flowed freely now, glistening in the maze's ethereal light. As they fell, the phoenix's form began to change, the wrinkles smoothing, the clouded eyes clearing to reveal irises of burning gold, the hunched posture straightening until she towered over Isolde. Her gray hair ignited, becoming a mane of living flame that cast dancing shadows across the maze walls. "You've succeeded where countless others failed," the transformed phoenix said, her voice now resonant with power. "Not by trying to make me cry, but by reminding me of what it means to truly see and be seen." She bent and pressed a burning kiss to Isolde's forehead. "For this gift of genuine compassion, I offer one in return. When the third trial comes, remember that names have power, and what is named can be claimed." And with those cryptic words, the phoenix spread arms that had become magnificent wings of crimson and gold flame. "We shall meet again, Threshold Walker," she promised. Then, with a sound like a roaring furnace, she launched herself skyward, burning a hole through the maze ceiling and soaring into the cavern's artificial night, a comet of living fire that illuminated the entire twilight realm before disappearing from view. As she vanished, the maze walls around Isolde began to dissolve like mist before morning sun. The whispering voices faded, leaving behind a profound silence. When the transformation was complete, she found herself standing in a beautiful garden where the maze had been, paths of polished stone winding among beds of crystal flowers that chimed softly in an unfelt breeze. At the garden's center stood Asher, watching her with an expression of genuine amazement. "You freed her," he said as Isolde approached. "The eternal phoenix, bound to the maze for 700 years, freed by a cursed mortal who asked what she wanted rather than demanding what was needed." "Was that not the point of the trial?" Isolde asked. "To demonstrate true compassion?" "The point," Asher replied carefully, "was to test whether compassion would lead you to fulfill the king's command, to make her cry. No one expected you to free her from her binding entirely." The implications settled over Isolde gradually. "The Fey King will not be pleased." "No," Asher agreed. "He will not. The phoenix was one of his most valuable possessions. Her tears contained powerful magic, harvested over centuries for various purposes." A smile touched his perfect lips. "Yet he cannot fault your success. You completed the trial as specified. You made her cry. That her tears came from laughter rather than sorrow, and that she subsequently escaped her binding were unforeseen consequences." And there was something in his tone, a carefully concealed satisfaction perhaps, that made Isolde wonder again about Asher's true motives. He seemed pleased by this disruption to the king's plans, despite being himself a resident of the Twilight Court. "What happens now?" she asked. "The third trial?" Asher nodded, his expression growing serious. "The path of mirrors awaits, a challenge not of intellect or compassion, but of will." He gestured toward the horizon, where a distant structure gleamed like a fallen star. "There, you will face not external obstacles, but internal ones, your deepest desires and fears given form." "Desires and fears often wear the same face in twilight," Isolde murmured, recalling Lord Cassius's journal. "So the phoenix said." "The phoenix spoke truly," Asher confirmed. "The third trial tests your ability to distinguish between what you want and what you need, between what you fear and what you must embrace. Many champions have completed the first two trials only to falter at the third, seduced by visions of what might be rather than accepting what is." Isolde thought of the Clarity Goblet, how it had shown her a unified reflection that accepted both human and wolf aspects of herself. Perhaps that experience had been preparation for this final challenge. "When do we begin?" she asked. Asher studied the strange sky, where what appeared to be stars, but might have been something else entirely glittered against the cavern ceiling. "There is time yet," he said. "The night is young in your world. Rest a while before the final trial. Even champions require respite." He led her to a small pavilion in the crystal garden, where cushioned benches offered comfortable seating, and a fountain of what appeared to be liquid moonlight burbled soothingly in the center. As they settled, Isolde found herself watching Asher with renewed curiosity. Throughout her trials, he had remained a constant presence, supportive yet mysterious, helpful yet clearly pursuing his own agenda. "Why are you helping me?" she asked directly. "What do you gain if I succeed?" Asher's expression grew distant, his silver blue eyes reflecting the garden's crystalline beauty. "Perhaps I simply enjoy disrupting routines that have grown stale over centuries. Perhaps I find you more interesting than the previous 17 champions. Or perhaps—" He hesitated, choosing his words with careful precision. "Perhaps I recognize something of myself in you, a being caught between states, belonging fully to neither one world nor another." The admission, however obliquely phrased, seemed genuine. Isolde sensed there was more he wasn't saying, deeper motivations he kept hidden, but she appreciated even this small revelation. In a realm where direct lies were impossible, but misdirection was an art form, even partial truths had value. They sat in companionable silence for a time, Isolde gathering her strength for the final challenge. The liquid clarity from the first trial still flowed through her veins, sharpening her perceptions, while the phoenix's words echoed in her mind. Names have power, and what is named can be claimed. As she contemplated these cryptic pieces of guidance, distant music began to drift through the garden, the same ethereal melodies she had heard during her first visit to the Twilight Court. The sound reminded her of why she had come, of the 6 princesses even now dancing away their life force in the crystal pavilion. "It's time," Asher said, rising from his seat. "The court's revels have begun, which means the king will soon expect your arrival for the third trial." Isolde stood as well, adjusting her cloak and ensuring her silver dagger was secure at her belt. The ironwood leaf brooch Lyra had given her felt warm against her skin, while the iron key from King Thorn rested cool and heavy in her pocket. Whether these tokens would prove useful in the final challenge remained to be seen, but their presence gave her comfort nonetheless. "I'm ready," she said, voice steady despite the anticipation coiling in her chest. "Lead the way to the path of mirrors." As they left the garden and proceeded toward the distant gleaming structure, Isolde felt a strange certainty settling over her. Whatever awaited in the third trial, whatever desires or fears manifested to test her will, she would face them with the clarity she had earned and the compassion she had demonstrated. The Fae might be masters of illusion and deception, but she had something they perhaps lacked: the unique perspective of one who had lived as neither fully human nor fully other, but something in between. In twilight, such threshold existence might prove her greatest strength,